Hello? Hello? Can you unmute the audio? Hello? 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 Can you unmute the audio?
Yeah, this is Kevin Morelli. Is anybody else on here?
Yes, I'm on here, but the audio is muted for the speaker.
Yeah, Roger. I sent a text to Ryan and tried to call him and left a voicemail. So hopefully he'll get it.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
heard from different stakeholders about that. It sounds like it was a bit controversial because there were some, some taking advantage of the system that occurred. But the response that we got, it was fairly divided. About half the response. So we had 44% people say yes, around 43% said no, and the rest were, either unsure or no opinion. And so that was one of the more controversial things we asked about. But so the take-home message was, that respondents really value keeping that flexibility that they have with substitution. And so, we've really taken that into account in developing this proposal. We also asked about platoon elimination because, as I mentioned, one of the goals is to try and, modernize the permitting system to reflect the needs of, the fleet at its current size. So we asked, whether people would be in favor of eliminating the platoon system. 77% said yes, 8% said no. These darker and lighter greens are either no opinion or they weren't sure. We proposed a system where, in eliminating platoon, we convert to, instead of each permit allowing you to fish one shackle, one net, during every week of the season, during every other week of the season, we have a convert to a system where you're allowed to fish a half shackle during every week of the season. And so 56% of respondents said yes, there was sort of greater uncertainty. And so again, we decided, okay, one of the reasons we're having this meeting was to try and provide more information about how that system would work. So that's one of the things we're going to be doing today. We asked about permit consolidation. Were people in favor of allowing people to hold, so currently the maximum number of permits we can hold is 3, allowing people to hold up to 4 permits. 78% were in favor of that, and whether people were in favor of, once you had 4 permits, sort of consolidating to a those 4 permits into a single permit to reduce the paperwork associated with renewal and transfer and things like that. And so this would be 4 permits to allow you to fish 2 nets on your boat every week this season. So again, broad support for that. So we took this information from the surveys. We have had a number of conversations with the steering committee, with different entities within Fish and Wildlife, so the biologists, the enforcement, license and revenue, and we've, based on all of that information, we've drafted a proposal for some regulatory changes, and we're going to share that with you today. And we're really interested in hearing your comments. What you think will work, what you think won't. If you have alternative ideas, something you think might work better. So that's the goal of today. So I'm going to provide just sort of an overview of sort of the main proposed regulatory changes, and then I'm going to walk through each one in more detail. The first one is to eliminate the platoon system and develop a new permitting system that allows people to fish during every week of the season. We want to develop a mechanism for permit consolidation. We want to establish sort of a long-term capacity goal for the fleet under that new system. We want to develop a way to eliminate the substitution paperwork while still maintaining that substitution flexibility for the fleet. We want to change the regulations, which currently nets and vessels are required to be marked with their permit number. We think that there's a way that we can track fishing activity just based on fishing vessel number, which would try and simplify the process. We want to set uniform season dates for all the areas. And then there's some additional alterations to the permitting process that are more about how License and Revenue Branch handles your permits, your permit renewals and the paperwork. So I'm going to go through each of these in detail. Background, as I said, this platoon system was developed during a time when there was a much larger fleet, and it was developed really due to allay competition for space San Francisco Bay is just not that big. Of regulatory complication. And so because of that, there's broad desire amongst permit holders and fishing game staff to eliminate the platoon system. And so, one of the issues that we've been having is that we need a way to eliminate the platoon system while still maintaining the current fleet capacity. And so let me explain what I mean by that. So the current system, it basically allows, if you have a permit, say you have a permit in the odd platoon, you're allowed to fish one shackle of gear every other week of the season. And, so if we were at full capacity in the, in the odd and even platoons, say in week one, the even platoon fishes and, at full capacity, say we had 80 nets being fished. And so, in week two, the odd platoon fishes, if it was at full capacity again, that would be 80 nets. And so that means that, regardless of, which permits are being fished, it's 80 nets from approximately 40 boats that are being fished during each week of the season. And so we would really, for simplification, we would love to be able to just eliminate the platoon system and, say, okay, your permit entitles you to fish every week of the season. But that means that, at full capacity, the fleet size would double. And so suddenly everyone could fish the first week of the season. And so what that means is the department is faced with a scenario where they could have up to 160 nets fished, in week one, and then again in week two. And so unfortunately, that's just an untenable position for the department. So we have needed to come up with a system that attempts to eliminate the platoon system, but still maintain the same amount of nets in the water each year or each week. So how do we do this? So under the old system, one permit, one net every other week of the season. We are proposing a system where one permit is half a net every week of the season. And so that's what would keep the same amount of gear in the water. And so I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how can I fish half a net?
You're saying 4 halves equal 2 nets?
Yes.
So you combine them, so it's the same thing. You're just
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So, under the old system, you would assign 2 permits to a vessel in order to fish 2 nets. And so, you assign 2 evens for the even week and then 2 odds to that same vessel for the odd week. For the season, that vessel has 4 permits assigned to it. Under this new system, what we are proposing is that because each permit is worth half a net that can be fished at any time, if you assign 4 permits to a boat, that boat can fish 2 nets. So even though it's complicated, functionally, it should be the same, that basically in order for a boat to fish a full complement of gear during every week of the season, they would need 4 permits assigned to it.
No, but someone can have 2 permits and
fish 1 net. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And then they can't fish for 1.
Right. Yes. So, we were trying to look at the data that Fish and Wildlife has to try and figure out if there was anyone who had fished a single net every other week of the season. And, so, that gave us some comfort that we weren't disenfranchising anyone with this system.
In looking back over that data, did you know that in '92 we only did half a net by switching from 2 nets per permit to 1 net per permit? So I'm kind of wondering why there's this arbitrary assessment that it's not tenable. Why is it not tenable?
So I think is what we're doing here today is we're happy to hear your comments on what you would recommend otherwise. we're just presenting a proposal to you.
Yeah.
And you can say, I don't agree with that proposal for this and this and reason, and I recommend having 160 nets each week. And then we'll, take that back to the department, the steering committee, and we'll take that comment into account and discuss it and see if it makes a change to the final proposal. So, but if you have a recommendation different than the proposal, that's what we want.
Okay, I have a recommendation. You keep one net per permit, but still only allow 2 nets on the boat.
Okay.
Got it?
Yep.
All right.
Where did the 139, where did that number come from? Does it include CH permits? Is it the?
Yeah, so that's just the number of permit holders, so that's
Yeah.
the number of people.
Individuals.
Yeah.
So
Oh.
it's just the total number of individuals, not the total number of permits. Because as you guys know, sometimes there's multiple holders for the
What-
CH. And,
What is the total in those permits?
171 currently. If I'm
yeah,
right
but that
there.
includes Tamales, Humboldt. So for San Francisco Bay, Tom, do you have the number right at your tongue?
I don't have that.
It's been around 160. It's kind of hovered around there. And so that would include the CH permits.
I think I looked online and 157 is what the revenue records, the renewed permits show from last year.
Yeah,
Now, does that include CH?
it would include
I think it
CH.
is.
By the
Because-
time that these regulations go in, on the new plan, those permits after this year, you may get a lot less permits, so you won't have that number, you won't have a lot less. And then that will change a lot of this around.
That is potentially true.
And hopefully, what the dream was of us that have been on the advisory committee and all this stuff for years, is to eventually go on to that
Right.
and eliminate all this stuff.
And can this,
Go ahead.
can this be written in this some way to where if circumstances change, that this can be readdressed at a later time? If there are fewer permits, that you can change how that works? In other words, I'm worried about a fisheries management plan being stuck in that this is it, you can't change.
Yeah, so let's come back to that question.
Yeah, I was
because-
gonna say, let's keep going through the proposal, because I think some of your questions may be answered as we go forward.
And I have one more question. For the last 6 months, I haven't been, I've been hiding. But, Nick Sarkoff and I, we instigated the money from Herring Research and Lars. I'm on a committee with Nick and Yamasaki, and I have really been bad. I haven't called him or heard what's going on and everything. I got a question. How many people are on this management committee and how many are actually like you, Dave, that are experienced with the fisheries?
So I think your question is what's
My
been
question
the
is,
steering
how many
committee?
people are on there
Yeah.
and how many
So the
are
steering
fisheries
committee,
and all of that?
Well, yeah, so the steering committee is comprised, there's 6 people that make up that steering committee. 2 are from industry, 1 is Bud Nero, who's in the room, not throwing it bus, but Bud's here, Nick Soricon.
Nick's on it?
Nick's on it, and then we have 2 folks from the conservation community, Anna Weinstein and Jeff Chester, and then it's been myself and Tom Barnes, who was our program manager until recently, he retired. Kirsten Ramey, who's my supervisor, is taking that position right now, as the term representatives.
And I have one more thing that I'm really concerned about. Do you remember, I know Ernie remembers, when we had Frank Henry write a proposal to register all permits to a boat and all that, all those paperwork and all that stuff. And Jim Kellogg was gonna get it through the Senate, whatever. And then because of the management plan and everything, they said, oh, well, but assuming that this plan is gonna go through, I would like to see what it's in there. Where you cut all this paperwork out and all this stuff. I think you understand what I'm saying.
yeah, that'll be.
She may have said that, you gotta excuse me, I don't hear very good, and I find I'm even a hard time seeing that.
We tried to make it.
That's why,
I know.
that's why I'm so inept. Things that I probably should be.
Well, I can try and speak louder, and yeah, I apologize. The projector would have needed to be like really far back, but then couldn't attach to the computer to make the screen bigger. So, but yes, so I'm going to keep going because this is just one piece of this larger proposal, and so hopefully a lot of those questions will be answered, and then we can talk a little bit more about it. Okay, so number 2 on our list was developing a mechanism for consolidation. So, so I mentioned we want to switch to this system where everyone's permits gets, your permit, if you have an even permit currently, it gets converted to this, we're going to call it a tier 1 permit, meaning that it allows you to fish a half shackle every week of the season. So there will no longer be odd and even and DH. Those will all just get converted to a tier 1 permit. CH will get converted, permits will be converted to 2, tier 1. All the tier 1s are equivalent. And so this then allows us to create a mechanism for consolidation of those tier 1 permits. And so the reason that we want to do that is, again, to simplify the permitting process. We want to get to a situation where a permit allows you to fish 2 nets any week of the season. It would reduce the paperwork associated with, permit renewals and transfers. And so we propose to do this by, as I said, establishing this 2-tier system. So just to recap, even though I already described this, tier 1s, basically all permits that are currently held now get converted to tier 1 permits. And, all those tier 1 permits are transferable. We would make a change in the regulations to allow people to hold up to 4 tier 1 permits. And again, a vessel can have 4 tier 1 permits assigned to it at a time in order to fish a full 2 nets. So we're then going to introduce this second tier of permits. So if an individual holds 4 tier 1 permits, that would then be converted to a tier 2 permit. This is a single permit number that entitles you to 2 nets every week of the season.
Excuse me, you can. I
know, so that would be a regulatory change that we would make that would allow you to hold up to 4. Under the regulations, permittees would only be allowed to hold 1 tier 2 permit. So this, this group of 4 tier 1s gets converted to a tier 2. Once that happens, you can only own 1 of those. Again, a vessel can only fish a single tier 2 permit.
What if you're leasing one from that?
Then it doesn't get transferred. Then it just, so they stay tier 1s. So if you have 3 tier 1s and you're leasing a tier 1, they're all still tier 1s. You need to renew each of them individually. And so once something gets converted to a tier 2 permit, that conversion is permanent. That tier 2 permits are transferable. And additionally, any of the any permits that are sort of returned, relinquished to the department would be held and not be reissued until there's, sort of a group of tier 1 permits that are relinquished. Those would be converted to a tier 2 permit, and then if a new applicant wanted to fish, they would apply for a tier 2 permit. So those would not be available until the fishery got below the long-term capacity goal. And so we'll talk about that next. Let's see. So, I just put up some scenarios, just, I think you guys understand it, but in general, if you own 1 even permit or 1 odd permit, you would get 1 tier 1 permit. Say you own an even and an odd, so you'll get 2 tier 1 permits. If you own a CH permit, you'll get 2 tier 1 permits. Say you own 1 DH and 1 CH, so you'll get 3 tier 1 permits. So currently the most anyone can hold is 3, but once these regulatory changes that we're proposing, if they were to go into effect, you would be allowed to hold 4. So you could, you know, buy a 4th tier 1 permit, and then that would get transferred to a tier 2 permit.
I appreciate your efforts to try to simplify this. It's a mess. Currently, everybody who's actively fishing in this room is essentially fishing what you propose to be a tier 2 permit. They're fishing 2 nets per group. I own 3 permits. It doesn't exactly simplify the process for me. I have to go out and buy a permit now to stay at a full measure of 2 nets in the fishery.
You can still lease one.
Thank you. Okay. As long as they're around, but.
Well, right now you still have to lease them. Even if you were gonna, you know, under the current regulations, you still have to get that other permit to fish a whole property.
Yes, I understand that. But in this new scenario, to be a tier 2 permittee, I will have to buy one.
Sure.
And you all have to buy one. You all got to buy one.
But you can fish as a tier 1. You can just have 4 tier 1s.
Yeah, and that the scenario you're talking about, Ernie, is one thing we talked about. It's like, yes, it could compel people to transfer a permit or buy another permit, or it may make your 3 permit situation more valuable to someone else who only has 1 permit. They may then want to lease one of your permits so that they can get to a staff permit. So we're trying to look at it both ways, and clearly there's going to be winners and losers in this scenario. But the input we got based on the survey and work with the steering committee is that this was one option I potentially consider. And we're here to listen and get some feedback.
Yeah, I'm not here to debate. I just wanted to drop that comment in.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, a lot of guys are going to comment exactly what I comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, could you, if you could combine 2 into, you know, a tier whatever, you know, just take 2 and turn them into 1, somebody could just have 2 permits and fish 1 net, both, all, you know, for both fisheries.
What happens if you trade 2 permits for 1? So what happens with the revenue of the state? How are they going to generate the revenue from that?
The permit fees have not been sorted out yet. I mean, we're still early in the process, because one thing we want to see if this was even a viable solution based on the industry input. Once we get that, then we're still working with license and revenue branch, who will also, they need information from our accounting services branch. So it's a longer, I don't have an answer for that. I don't know what the fees will look like. What I can tell you is the department doesn't, we're in this mode where things have to pay for themselves. So the fee structure probably wouldn't go down. I'll be perfectly upfront.
Question here? Yeah, so say for instance, I didn't want to lease my cousins anymore after, you know, so I'm a tier 1 because I own 2, but I still own 3, right? So I can fish 1 net and a half.
No, you can't fish that.
Can't fish a half? If I own 3 permits, 3 permits is a half a net is 1 half a net on 3 permits. I fish 100 and I fish 65 fathom plus half, or do I have to get that? Just the hypothetical question, what never happened.
Yeah. What was intended is that the regulations around mesh size and length, the description was not changed. But in net is 360 feet. It's whatever. It wouldn't change. Right? That wasn't the change.
And according to law now, could anybody apply for it?
Technically, I believe, technically we are below the caps that are specified in 163, so I think there are, don't quote me on the exact number, but there are some permits.
So that should be changed.
Yeah, and I thought that this went before the commission, and the commission actually put a moratorium on issuing permits. And I believe that when that was looked at, the regulations say the department may. It doesn't say they shall, it says the department may, which leaves the department where they can or can't. They have the choice.
This exact situation was just presented to our license and revenue branch staff. They looked into it, spoke with legal. We can in fact, and are in fact issuing new permits based on, because I think I recall that commission meeting, but they never put any regulatory language in to actually say that we couldn't. They just had caps in there, and there was no additional language in 162 that somebody could not issue.
But I just remember the commission actually voted to put a moratorium on it. I don't know where that's written.
I think he's right.
Yeah, they did.
But there has to be implementing regulations with that.
If a commission says we can't issue any more permits, that doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything unless there's implementing regulations.
Okay. So this is all crazy unless that's correct.
The caps.
Yeah, the whole thing. If anybody can go get, the second that you pass this and you can own 4 permits, everybody's going to apply for a permit.
Right, and so one of the regulatory changes, so we're going to talk about a capacity goal next, and so one of the proposed changes is putting a moratorium on reissuing permits until basically they can be reissued as tier 2 permits. So not reissuing, even though they are available, the department wouldn't hand out tier 1 permits. It would basically say you can apply for a tier 2 permit if there are 4 tier 1s that have been relinquished and are.
Well, what if somebody has 3? They can go and say, hey, I need another.
They could right now. In the current situation, yes.
But you can only own 3.
Right, you can only own 3 right now. I mean, what we envision is one of the scenarios, if we were to adopt these new regulations, new caps, people are wanting to exit this industry. I think that's probably realistic to say. So someone may want to go and transfer a permit off when they were able now. I think so inherently it has potential to make those permits, I'll put in air quotes, more valuable than they are now, because someone may want to convert to tier 2 and need that additional permit. Someone's looking to sell. We're not in a situation where we're reissuing permits, but there are permits out there that we hear that are people willing or wanting to transfer or sell. If that makes sense.
I may be thinking out loud, but do everything that you propose, but keep the law that says only 2 nets per boat fishing.
Right.
What effect would that have on your?
Oh, rather than the.
Yes, instead of the half shackle. Would that address your concerns regarding capacity?
So you're basically saying.
So what I'm saying is, keep the law, no more than 2 nets per boat. Go ahead and do all this. But keep the law, no more than 2 nets.
So people who have 3 permits.
Yes.
Could potentially, so without specifying whether a permit allows you to fish, half a net, 1 net, 2 nets, we get into a situation where, someone who has 1 permit, how many nets do they fish? Someone who has 2 permits, do they fish 2? Someone who has 3 permits,
They're still fishing 2.
2 on this boat, are they leasing theirs to someone else?
Yeah, that's,
And that's a good reason.
So is the purpose trying to get 1 permit to be able to fish
Yes.
2 crews?
Mhm.
Both crews. So then they're trying to.
Yeah.
But all this is a good reason why you need lease permits. The guy wants to go fishing, wants to fish.
And that's still the option, as Sarah went through this when we talk about assigning permits and so on. maybe we can keep going through this.
Yeah, we'll keep
I
going.
think nothing is
Yeah.
decided. This is
all new to me, so I
just
Yeah.
heard, it's just like, wow.
And it's complicated, I know.
Yeah, we're just trying to meet a capacity goal while keeping people actively fishing without alienating all the fleet or half the fleet. So it's trying to find this balance,
Yeah.
and that's where we are.
And so, because remember, one of the overarching goals of the FMP was to, how did I phrase it, codify the management as it's been for the last 10 years. And so, yes, there was a change made at one, in the early 90s to go from a permit as 2 nets to 1 net. But that was made, I think, because of space and effort concerns. And so, the department biologists have said, okay, we think that the current level of effort is sustainable for this fishery. And so
there's 10 boats fishing.
I know.
Okay.
But, and that is
Let's not forget.
absolutely. But, one of the challenges that we have in developing this FMP is we need a management plan that works for the current fleet now and any potential future scenario. And so, I know, like, it seems really unlikely, but it is possible that markets change. The herring market could change, price could come back, demand could change. There are lots of other sort of factors that are beyond control of this fishery that can influence demand. And so we need a management plan that makes sense and is defensible and is sustainable, even if suddenly everyone wanted to fish herring.
Right.
So
You might, I think you're probably planning on coming to this later, but one of the things that I've been hearing and stuff like that is, it's been 10 years since the last change or more, right? So because the fleet is so small, 10 years ago there was a much larger fleet. Now we're down to a small amount of boats. I don't want to steal you guys' thunder later, but what are you talking about doing a shorter, maybe 2 years or 4 years reevaluation of the volume of boats to see how these changes can be reverted however they need to be, keep it a fluid scenario somewhat? Or is this something that you're planning, that these will basically reduce it down to only?
I think the proposal has a capacity goal.
yeah, so we're gonna talk about capacity goal
We're coming to
next.
that.
So yes, we would like to create some sort of long-term capacity goal. And the reason I say long-term is because, obviously we aren't interested in, forcing anyone out of the fishery or anything like that. But, the department can decide we're not going to reissue permits until we're below this sort of long-term goal and let, natural attrition occur. And so that's sort of what we are envisioning. The current capacity, given if the department biologists have said that, the current effort levels, which translates to approximately, if it was at maximum capacity, if every permit was fished, that's about 80 nets a week, 40 boats a week. That in the new system would translate to 40 of these tier 2 permits. So again, if a tier 2 permit is, 2 nets per boat, that would be the long-term capacity goal. However, we have heard some feedback from stakeholders, from our steering committee, that there is interest in potentially looking at a lower capacity goal. And so we are interested in hearing feedback on that because, so one number that has been floated is 30. The department they are, interested in sustainability. They think 40, they can justify 40 as a sustainable cap. But if industry wants a lower cap, the department is interested in being responsive to that. So that's one thing that we would really like some feedback on, what is, sort of an appropriate capacity goal going forward. Sorry, one second. In terms of the ability to revisit this down the line. So, one of the challenges in writing this FMP is we want a system that is flexible and adaptive, but also, transparent and rigid enough that, if a whole new set of fish and wildlife staff were hired tomorrow, they could look at it and say, okay, we know what to do. And the industry would say, okay, we know they're going to keep doing what, what's been agreed upon in this management plan. So we really are trying to, walk that line. And so we are interested in, I will be honest with you, given the time and effort that it takes to amend FMPs, I don't see like an actual FMP amendment happening for a very long time for this fishery unless something catastrophic happens. But we are trying to write the FMP so that as much discretion and control is sort of moved is to have an FMP that says, we think, the FMP specifies that a capacity goal of 40 is what is, long-term capacity goal of 40 is sustainable. Anything under that is at the department's discretion. And so that would then allow, based on how the fishery evolves and feedback, wouldn't be set necessarily in regulations if there's this capacity goal, just that, it wouldn't be set specifically what it is, just that there is one that the department can set, and then be, up to the department to, change that if they wanted to. So we are sort of looking at how we can write this FMP such that we can address that flexibility issue as we move forward.
Unless I've got it really wrong, I consider this capacity goal to be an indictment against the quota system that we have used successfully for over 30 years. Is there something that this steering committee takes exception with managing this fishery by quota? And I say this because, at one time, you could hardly drive around the nets. There were so many boats and nets.
140 boats.
But we had a quota in place. I mean, I participated in fishing seasons that lasted 36 hours. Boom. Well, the capacity of the resource was reached in 36 hours, not by the number of boats or nets. You understand? Now look, I mean, this isn't rocket science. It's not reinventing the wheel. This quota is the system that's used in British Columbia and Alaska effectively.
They have limited, the thing, when that was going on, there were ripped and shredded nets everywhere, and it was a mess.
Yeah. I'm not saying, I'm not saying that. I'm saying
yeah, no, I
that
what
the
you're
quota
saying, but
is the capacity.
Yeah.
So just, I just want to make sure I'm taking your comments, and we're going to take down notes.
So
But-
I said my piece.
Right, so your comment is that you don't think a capacity goal is needed, is what I'm hearing.
Exactly.
Okay. So we'll take
If
that.
you're going to use the quota.
Sure.
Yeah.
Except the fact that we did have, at that point, we had where, I mean, there was nets dragging into nets and nets disappearing and
Yeah.
nets shredded.
That's
And
why.
with the fewer boats, that's gotten much better, and that's one of the things that, where this would make a much more orderly fishery.
I'm not arguing that at all.
Okay.
I'm just saying a tool to manage a fishery.
You bet. The
Quota versus number of permits.
And there'll still be a quota in place. And Matt hit on this a bit. So one of the things we're trying to address with the capacity goal and a net cap is because, as you guys all know, this is a high visibility urban fishery. And when nets get away and mammals potentially get caught up,
Both get
We don't have that.
Yeah.
I know it doesn't
Yeah.
happen anymore because everything is orderly. And so, have you noticed there are very few public comments from the conservation community that are coming down on you guys or worried about certain issues? Things are generally orderly. Everybody generally follows those regulations. Things work well. And as you guys, everyone knows, I know there's probably some crowd fishermen in here. People are really concerned about marine mammal interactions with fishing gear. So if we can keep herring off of that radar and keep keep things orderly, it's good for everything. It's good for the department, it's good for the fishing industry. It's just a win.
I think 40 boats is 30 boats is too little, because then you get to the point where we can't catch the quota if there was a bigger quota. 40 boats, I think, is where you need to be, because the economics of it will lower it down. Like right now, we're in an economic situation, we don't have more than 10 boats. 40 boats gives you, because if the quota ever did come back, it gives room to have.
And the department positions 40 boats?
This proposal's for.
Yeah, well, and does the 30 boats come from the NGO?
No.
No. The NGOs are not really focused on, they're more focused on the control rule, on how the quota is set. They're not so much focused on the fishing. And how the fishing operational side of the fishing is not that interesting.
David, you were involved. I proposed to get the nets down, and you were one of the supporters when we did that. The fishing game agreed to that. Now with the management down, would we be able to make any changes? I mean, which things that we don't think of now would make come up.
So now it's the time to make comments and recommendations. So if you have a recommendation.
Would that be able to be changed?
Yeah. Through this process, a recommendation that instead of having a 65,000 net and you want to make it a 50,000 net, that would be a comment or a proposal or recommendation that you can make, and that would be definitely considered by the department.
That would be my concern. Of course, I'm not going to be involved in that, but,
Right.
but as the fishery goes on, a lot of things could change.
Sure.
And, I know what really makes it bad. Now you got to go through the legislature to get anything done, and that's really stupid.
Regarding future changes, would you just say it would be really difficult once the FMP is in place?
It's really difficult to go through an FMP amendment process.
Did you hear that, Sam?
But
Did you hear that?
it's difficult to go through in order to actually change sort of the core management strategy within the fisheries management plan. It requires basically having a big public process, and so that is difficult. We are trying to really sort of provide sort of the bones of a framework for management, for a management procedure. I'll go into detail about what that actually means a little bit later, but we're also trying to give the department authority over, things that, as long as there's sort of these bounds in place, that we can say anything under this is sustainable. We can go to, if anyone sues the department, we can say, like, we got this management plan, we're following it, it's sustainable. But under that, we would like the department to be able to make changes as necessary. So that's what we're trying to walk that line between, giving the department some flexibility moving forward, while still having a management plan that meets all the criteria that it needs to meet.
Well, I'm not going to get around to fish anymore, but one of the things that I would like to see you do is, like I said, our big dream and learning room is to talk to someday we're going to get down to 1 million. And when you do this management plan, I think it's got to be worded that if it ever gets to a certain amount of permits, then all this stuff will up.
And that's definitely part of the proposal.
That's what I would be concerned with. Like I say, I'm going to see it. So.
But you can only own 1, 2, or 3 per minute also.
Yes. Yes, and just to get back to your question about, yes, this will be a quota managed fishery. Yes, it is the quota that really is providing sort of the majority of protection in terms of stock sustainability. The capacity goal for effort is more about both spatial issues, as was described, and economic issues. How many people do you want to be competing with? So that's one of the reasons that we're really, the department doesn't have a strong number that they're saying, we really, really want this. We're interested in your feedback. What do you guys want to see in your fishery? What do you think is appropriate moving forward? Okay, so I'm going to move on to, we're trying to eliminate the paperwork associated with substitution. So currently, you activate your permit by assigning it to a vessel. and you have to be on board that vessel to fish unless you designate a substitute, and that requires a form. And so the reason behind that form is that it tells the department who is accountable for a violation on, that occurs when that permit's being fished. That's sort of the main reason that that the department sort of needs that paperwork currently. And so based on the survey, clearly fishermen really, appreciate the flexibility that substitution gives them. And so we want to try and retain that flexibility while ensuring that there is, less paperwork for both you guys and for CDFW staff, and the accountability that enforcement needs to make sure that, they want not just whoever's fishing to be accountable for some violation, but also permit holders. So we're trying to work on a system for that.
State of Washington has one form, owner and operator. I'm the owner. You actually can have two operators. I can have my son as an operator, I can have Ernie as an operator. One form, tells you who owns it and who's operating. But you can do the same thing. Like, for instance, like that, all this I've got, because we can't only own 3, can't own 4, so I'm getting these like that's a busy, right? When they all that paperwork on one piece of paper, Busy Galley's the owner, and Dominic Penny's the operator. And it's just that simple.
On a credit card.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that is part of the goals and this elimination of paperwork and getting down to one permit, as Sam talked about, would get closer to that for sure.
And the department can let those guys know on the CDFW, California Fish Game number, blah, blah, blah. It's 80, it's 284, it's 227, and 155. It's real simple. There you go.
So yeah, that's actually what we are proposing. Yes, what we're proposing is that, so you'll still need to designate a fishing vessel. You'll need to assign your permit to a vessel at the beginning of the season. And again, that's up to 4 tier 1 permits on a vessel. And then anyone with a valid commercial fishing license can operate that vessel, as a crew member, or working as crew, or as the operator. And that vessel needs to comply with all regulations. If that, if a violation is committed, the operator is cited, but the regulations will be changed to specify that all of the permits assigned to that vessel, those permit holders are also accountable for the violation. And so that means that their permits will be, at risk, basically. And so that their permits can't be transferred until the violation is adjudicated. And so basically it just provides a mechanism for on the water flexibility. Permits are assigned to the vessel for the season. Anyone can fish it. Whoever's on board can be cited, but those permits, and it's all of the permits that are aboard, whoever holds those are responsible for any violation committed by the vessel.
That's not right. I don't think that's, the crew doesn't really have much say other on what the captain does with the nets.
You're saying I'm substituting Ernie's permit. I get a ticket. Ernie's permit. Ernie is still in trouble.
Yes.
No, that's
It's happened before where I've got a crewman that somebody just picked up, somewhere, and I've got Ernie's permit, and I put it in his name.
But you won't have to do that.
Yep.
There'll be an owner and an operator. Basically, as Don described, there'll be an owner that owns the net. That may be 2 people, 3 people, or 4 people, based on how we described it. But the operator is responsible, but so are the individual permit holders. And hold on. I just want to say, because this is actually a move across all California fisheries. It's not, this isn't something unique to herring. So the input that we've got from enforcement is that this is a move. They've done this, I think, with lobster fishery, I think with crab fishery to some degree. Don't quote me on all the fisheries, but this went all the way up to assisted chiefs. And that was the input that we got, is that there needs to be accountability, because what was happening is someone may be, the operator of the vessel, but the owner of the vessel they would then transfer the permit off before the court, or the, whatever the violation was able to go through court. And then you go to court and there's no process because they no longer have the permit. So they just want to make sure they follow the accountability through the whole.
Yeah, I still say I don't have a crew and I just find somebody around the dock and then put the permit in their name. And then there's a ticket issued on that. Or it's an attorney's permit. Okay, then I lose that guy. I don't know where he is. He won't show up in the court. He won't do anything. Earnings permit's in jeopardy. I don't even know where this guy is. That's the flaw in that.
That's its problem.
Well, I think that honestly that enforcement recognizes that that's an issue because they want permit holders to be invested in hiring someone who's going to follow the rules. So that, you know, that's sort of one of the reasons behind this change.
In Alaska, they have a double permit, you know, where you can stack 2 permits on for Bristol Bay for salmon. And if you get violations, there's a point system. If you get so many points, you can't fish the license for a year. And that what they'll do is they'll put those permits in the crewman's name. And then the actual guy that's driving the boat that's causing that violation, he doesn't even get a ticket. They go to this crewman, and then he just changes crewman and releases different permits. For the guy that's causing the trouble, he doesn't get held accountable. So all of a sudden, that's just part of their business is to they fish over the line. It's a common thing.
Shuffle permits.
Yeah, and then shuffle crewman and permits, and the guy that's actually causing the trouble is never held accountable.
That could happen in this deal, because I could lease all these permits, run a boat, get a ticket, and it's not on me because it's earned because it's his permit.
Yeah, and it's your crew. Who cares? Yeah.
But the operator in this scenario would still be responsible.
Yeah, how do they know who's the operator?
This is a question.
Yeah,
I don't want to put those guys on the spot, but if you guys want to say anything.
We're just trying to point out that there's a flaw in that.
Yeah. Well, here's my question, just to clarify this, is the industry supportive of the operator being liable, of the permittee being liable, or all? Just the operator?
The problem's gonna happen. I have to go lease this permit from somebody. The guy's gonna go, you know what? I'm not leasing this to you. It's gonna get hard for us to get us to lease a permit because they're gonna go, why should I lease you a permit? I'm not making any money. Like right now, there's no money being made. You can lease a permit for $400 or whatever. Some people, why is that guy gonna lease me a permit right now? When all of a sudden he could be liable if my neck gets cut and it's wrapped around the dock.
Good point. I should go to the operator. Yeah, show of hands for operators.
Well, how do you know why can't I put all the permits in my crewman's name and say he's the operator?
Then he gets the new one to say, I'm not the operator, you're the operator.
So all these questions that you guys are scenarios you're coming up with is something that enforcement has to think about.
Yeah, no,
they have to think about all these scenarios that you're describing. And so they're doing the best they can to come up with a way to make sure that somebody is accountable. And going back to the permittee, obviously, if I'm a permittee and I'm going to put it on, this guy because I know he's a crook and he's going to catch a lot of fish, but I'm not going to have any liability. We're going to go, oh boy, have at it. And then once he gets busted and taken out of the fishery, I'm going to go to the next crook, right? And then, so I'm not taking any responsibility either. So how do you balance the responsibility where permittees have a little bit of responsibility and operators have responsibility and crew, and also it's enforceable? So those are the things that we're trying to take into account.
I guess you could make them.
The fact is that the guy running that boat has got to be responsible. And you know as well as I do, that crewman, half of the time, he don't even know where he's at.
Yeah, no, I understand the crewman.
The registered boat.
Again, we go back to that.
The registered boat owner, and if the boat, the boat's part of the thing, then even it doesn't do somebody good to put in his crewman's name when he's could lose his boat off that violation.
The direction that all of these changes are going is to make a boat owner also the holder for permits.
It's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be that way.
No, it doesn't have to.
No,
Not
it
necessarily
doesn't
vote on
have to
it,
be that way, but, you know, right in this room, guys that are fishing are back and forth permits. And they're going to, you know, want to fully participate in tier 2, I guess it is. So a tier 2 permit holder would be the operator as well as the owner of all the permits. So you know, Sam says, you know, in reality, in fairness, it's the operator, the guy behind the wheel, not the crew or the guy sitting at home.
That's right.
What about like Phil that leaves a paint boat?
There's a comment from Becky in back.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of different scenarios, but it's just going to depend on the circumstance. If we come up on a vessel and whoever's driving the boat, it's his boat, even if he says it's not his boat, it's not the operator. Then if there's 3 or 4 different people on the boat, then everybody on the boat's going to get a ticket.
Yeah.
And one person wants to take responsibility and say, hey, you know what? These just my deckhands down the operator, I'm the one who made the mistake, you know, give me a ticket. Well, then we can go that way too. I mean, it depends on violation. They're still going to lose the load. They might lose the net. So there's the person who owns the permit who's sitting at home watching football while he's got guys fishing for him. Does he want to lose his load and his net and equipment? I mean, so everybody's got to kind of think about that and make sure you do things the right way. I mean, it's pretty simple.
Yeah. So just so I can get the comment down correctly, that we're hearing is that it sounds like from the majority that you guys are in favor of the operator being the one that's responsible for a violation. And so that's something that we'll keep going.
Well, I know I'm one of the only 2 crew members in here, but I know guys that have been in a fishery where the crew got ticketed as well, and they have really I mean, I get a little bit of say with my dad because I've been fishing with him my whole life. And I probably have a little bit of say with some of these other guys because they know my experience. But I get no say really. When it comes down to
the operator makes a decision.
And so like what I'm saying though is
Right now, you're liable though.
yeah, I don't think that's right. I don't have a.
One of the permits is substitute. Maybe it's not. Maybe
No,
it
it has to be.
But if you're a substitute in a group, it's exactly that. If you're a substitute, I can have 2 substitutes.
Yeah, if you're a substitute, if you have a permit in your name, then yeah. If you're a crew member that you don't have any permits in your name, then it goes back to that. Then you shouldn't, because I've also worked with guys or know guys that they would get stuck with that violation and they had absolutely nothing to do with it other than the fact that they were working on the boat. They're not invested any other way. So
Okay, so
that would be something I would throw in there.
So we got this comment down, and that'll definitely be looked at again. But just keeping track of time, and knowing we still have a lot to go, I'm going to ask Sarah on here. So is everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Comment?
Yeah, we talked.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, before we move on, I just wanted to, because I've been writing down notes trying to capture everyone's comments. And so what I'm understanding is that, you know, one of the issues is that, okay, so the regulatory language should specify that the vessel operator should be cited for a violation. Versus, you know, removing this language that's about crew members. The other thing is, so we are trying to get away from a situation where you have to designate a specific operator. Because again, you know, we're trying to improve, you know, reduce paperwork, keep flexibility. And so by specifying a designated operator, I mean, it's almost the same as substitution. So we could have, you know, on the renewal form, you know, basically we change the regulations such that your permit renewal form, you assign your permit to a vessel, and you sort of list who is the operator, and that person needs to be the operator for the, you know, entire season. You know, we can explore whether or not that should be able to be transferred via paperwork mid-season, you know, in the case of a problem. But that does, by having to specify who is the operator, that does somewhat limit flexibility. And so I just wanted to, you know, sort of make that clear that, you know, we're trying to say, okay, this proposed system does allow you to, you know, have whoever you want operate the boats, and, you know, you can change it on the fly, you know, based on someone gets sick or whatever, you know, someone's out of town, etc. But the only way we can really do that is, you know, for the system where enforcement cites whoever's on board the ticket, but there's still that backstop of accountability at the permit level. And, you know, again, as Ryan said, that's sort of a department-wide sort of desire to move to having permit holders accountable. Okay, so just wanted to sum that up.
Definitely keep that flexibility in whatever you can. That's a very big plus to come out of this. As far as the accountability, well, you know.
We don't want that permit, or we're in a different situation as fishery, because some of us are in a situation where we're leasing 4 permits. So we don't want that permit holder who we're leasing a permit from to have the liability of the ticket. That's what we're saying. Because this fishery is not like most other fisheries. The guys aren't leasing permits, so many permits. We can lease more than 1 permit. I mean, I own 3, but some people have to lease more than 1 permit.
You can't fish. You
can't fish though. I can't fish the whole thing without leasing somebody's permit. So we are outside of what the farmer wants these permits to be liable for the ticket. That's not how it works. Our fishery is different.
Well, once they change the regulations, and you can own 4, that, you know, that could change, because you could, then you own, then.
Well, you're still gonna do some, maybe only 2 permits and they're reasonable. Rich, did you?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say too that regardless of what the department staff wants to do, make everybody accountable with permit holders. You know, you still have to be prosecuted and found guilty by the DA. So just because you're held accountable doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be found, you know, in violation of the law. I mean, sometimes the DA may not want to file. They're going to file against the operator of the boat, perhaps, or deckhand, depending upon what's going on. I mean, it doesn't mean we're not going to cite the deckhands as well. And whoever's on the boat is fair game if it's a violation. But the DAs, you know, in Marin, San Francisco counties, are they going to want to prosecute an individual who's 100 miles away? I don't know. I mean, that's something we're going to have to find out if that's the way the department goes. But I mean, it takes some extra time, but
I don't know, that's 20 grand.
Are they still going to go in the new management plan? They're still going to have the point system?
Yeah.
Against your.
Well.
No.
Yeah, I don't think so.
The experience points?
No, it's
Point violations.
That hasn't been discussed.
Because I mean, there's still a point violation. I mean, I understand. So Dom can make it down. He leases his. And let's say Joe Schmo fishes 200 yards, 200 feet from Paradise Pier. Joe Schmo deserves to take it, not Dom. But Dom did lease one. The point system would still hurt Dom.
Okay.
It would still hurt him because, hey, Dom, you need to show responsibility. Who you're going to lease to, you might want to think about it. And obviously, if this guy can't decide if he's 100 yards or 400 yards from the pier, he's got a problem, I probably wouldn't want to lease to him. But I don't think he should be punished. But if the point system is still there, it kind of keeps the owner of the permit still like thinking, hey, do I really want to, what's this guy's career background? How long has he been fishing? Is he aware? Does he know San Francisco Bay? Can I trust this guy? But I agree. I mean, I understand what these guys are saying about,
the point system should stay. Right?
It's not Dom's fault because some guy had he was fishing on an odd day, or with a new, he's fishing too long with a net, or it's.
Yeah.
But
To be honest, no one had
Yeah,
brought
we
that up
kept
to
the
us.
sturgeon, they went through the nets, because it's not his fault. You sit at home, maybe, you had some medical problem, or
Okay, 2:45 time check.
Okay. Okay, so by assigning the permits to a vessel, there's no longer a need to track, which net is associated with which permit, especially, depending on how this accountability thing shakes out. So one of the benefits of saying, okay, whoever's on the boat can be cited and, all potential permit holders are liable, means that enforcement no longer needs to say, okay, this net, is based, with this half shackle system is, from this permit number and this permit number. We don't need to track permit numbers on the water. And so we can change the regulations to only ID the fishing vessel number, and so then to mark nets with the fishing vessel number. So then enforcement can, they'll basically have a list of what are the, vessels that are fishing, how many permits are on each one. They can see, okay, 2 nets, these 2 go with this boat. They can track that. And so that's just one opportunity for us to try and streamline the regulations and
that's different.
Yeah.
Okay.
right.
Otherwise, you guys have to negotiate.
What about all that plywood we're investing in the sun?
Some of it's looking pretty ragged, so I figured it was probably a good thing. We wouldn't have to apply this anymore.
Especially with
Yeah. Okay, so
okay.
you're proposing to set uniform season dates. So currently all of the different areas have, again, this is one of those things that, functionally there really hasn't been any fishing for quite some time outside of San Francisco Bay. But should fishing resume in the future, just in terms of simplifying the regulations, making them easier to follow, it would be easier to just set standardized start and end dates for all of the areas. And so we're proposing to use the San Francisco dates for all the other areas. So basically the fishery would start, on January 1 and go till, sorry, what did we say? Oops. Yeah, so to go to March 15th. If the start date falls on a weekend, the weekend closure for San Francisco Bay is still in effect. And so the fishery wouldn't start until 5 p.m. on the, on Sunday. Whatever, the first Sunday after the first.
January 1's on Thursday.
It opens.
It opens.
And I think that happened last year. The year before.
It was on a Wednesday.
It was near the end.
It seems like you're unnecessarily losing a week of fishing waiting for the following Sunday. Could it open at 5 p.m. on the Monday following the 1st?
Rather than the Sunday.
Yeah, rather than 7 days later.
No, it's not 7 days later. It opens on the 1st unless the 1st is on Saturday.
Friday or Saturday.
Then it would open Monday. Tell me.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, okay, that's all fine and dandy. I'd like to see that change. I'd like to see, can we go till Friday morning at 6 a.m.? I mean, Saturday morning at 6 a.m. instead of Friday at noon? I know the concern before was all the recreational boats
That
on the
makes
water.
sense. That makes a lot
On
of
the
sense.
water at 6 a.m. on Saturday. Over the years, I've been here since the conception of this fishery. Over the years, we've lost a lot of fishing time. You guys have been in the water is, a lot longer. I don't see the problem at this point. I don't see how it impacts anybody beyond this point.
And for, these guys, yeah, these guys and those guys.
Why?
Why?
They
Are
gotta
they going or?
They gotta work till Saturday morning.
And you have, well, there's other things on this. I mean, I know you guys want to fish all weekend, okay?
No,
No,
that's not what he said.
Okay, so you come in at 6 o'clock in the morning, gotta talk to the buyers about this too.
It's-
There's other
I'm making a
issues.
suggestion,
Yeah,
because so many times we've lost out on
The point, excuse me, the point is that we missed a lot of quotas because of this. That's where we're trying to finish off quota, get us out of the bay, get us out of here.
And there is a problem with not getting enough product to the buyers to supply their markets because of diminished catching ability of the fleet.
Yeah.
That would address catching, towards the quota.
We've got about thousands of tons over the years,
And-
and been out of the fishery a month ahead of time.
And there's one thing that kind of relates to that, this pumping at 10 o'clock at night. Years ago, when we had the dry pumps, I mean, that law is so outdated, it's just that, why can't we pump anytime? If when we're tied to Pier 45, when Stoner's dumps the blue bottles, when we cross the side, it makes more noise than what our pump.
Yeah, there used to be pumps in Sausalito and all over, now they're all.
And now
So again, that,
Quit all night long, what's the difference?
yeah, I mean, it does, again, that affects enforcement because they're trying to monitor what time's out. But it's what we're gonna do is we're gonna put it down as a comment to discuss, and obviously the department will weigh in and the steering committee or whatever, but yeah. another
David?
comment. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'd love to work overtime, it's good money,
Yeah, okay.
I would.
They don't give up by all of us.
All right, next.
Okay. All right, so got some additional alterations to the permitting process. And so these were really developed in consultation with the License and Revenue Branch. And because there's this desire to bring sort of the permitting process for all of the fisheries in California and kind of standardize it. So there's sort of a number of different proposals associated with this. So the first one is changing the deadline for renewing permits to be March 31st, with, basically a late fee would be charged after April 30th, because that's the deadline for all other fisheries. So additionally, there's language that in the regulation saying that License and Revenue has to hold, basically when they get their a permit renewal application, they're supposed to hold it to a specific date in the fall before they send out the permits. There's no reason for that to be the case. They should be able to process them as they get them and just send them out. So that's one of the changes we want to make. So currently, the regulations state that if there are more, if there are, basically if we're below the cap and people, more applicants want permits than permits are available, we are required to hold a lottery, but there's no language specifying how or when that lottery should take place. And so we just want to, we want these regulations to be transparent and implementable. And so License and Revenue has asked that we just provide some specification of, so that everyone would know, like, this is how the lottery works, this is when it happens, this is how people are notified, etc. Basically, they would like there to be a fee associated with if you need to if you need to assign your permit to a different vessel mid-season, because of a problem. There will be a form to fill out, and there will be a fee associated with that form. So they want the transfer fees to apply to all permit transfers, even transfers within family. Additionally, so, I know that one of the questions that, came up earlier was what will the fees be associated under this new system? And unfortunately, we don't have information on that yet, but there is a predefined process within the state. There's a worksheet for determining, what fees are, and some of it is based on what, sort of the level of work that, goes into processing these paperwork, and some of them are standardized, sort of with other fees in the department. And so we will be looking at the fee structure and just following, sort of whatever the rules are from License and Revenue to set the fees. And then additionally, they're trying to standardize this across all fisheries. In the event of a permit holder's death, the family has up to 2 years to transfer the permit. So those are just kind of bureaucratic changes.
So would I know that the herring permit's the one with the high transfer fee. And so
And there's others actually, too. I think lobster, I was looking at.
Well, yeah, they should have to bring those all in line for everything, just like they want to bring everything else in line. That should be the same. There's no reason a herring permit should be more money than any other permit.
There's a couple others that are 1,000, but yeah, I think they're trying to standardize everything.
Okay.
And that whole fee setting is outside of our purview, but yeah. They want everything uniform.
Okay, so, this was something that we don't have a strong proposal for, but we were interested in opening up a conversation about. So, some feedback we got during the scoping process, and then again, with the survey, was that, we asked about experience points, should there be some sort of preferential access for crew to get permits? And the feedback that we've gotten is that it's fairly controversial. Again, it seems like there was a lot of fraud that happened before with the experience points. However, there is, sort of a desire generally to maintain access to, California's fisheries, even if you don't have a lot of money for a permit. And so, one of the proposals that's been suggested is just not doing experience points, but to, set aside some number of permits that might, just be non-transferable. We wouldn't be taking away, making anyone's permit non-transferable. All the permits you guys own would, be transferable. But, as permits were sort of relinquished to the department could decide to set aside some amount that would be non-transferable, that would be available on a lottery basis, so that basically to give sort of a mechanism for new entrants to the fishery. And so, we're just sort of curious what people think about this. Any feedback on this?
What you're proposing, what you're considering, is completely different than any other permit in California, where access to the fishery is you buy a permit. So I really recognize that I am a permit holder. I don't really see a problem with that, because if you have a class of permits that are non-transferable and he has one permit, he's going to be fishing a half a shackle, or he's going to have to go lease another permit so that he fish one shackle. Is that kind of?
Well, I imagine that this would be, because once the department has it, it would be a tier 2 permit. That would be a non-transferable issuable permit.
Yeah, one of the things that's been raised at a few fishing community workshops is, access for a new generation of fishermen. Don't have all the capital, may not have a boat, may not have, all the assets that other fishermen have, but they'll allow a small portion of those to maybe have like an open access permit. That, maybe there's 2, maybe there's 3, maybe there's 5. No numbers have been thrown out, but it was more just to allow new entrants.
Right.
If all the permits are, theoretically, we're at the max cap for permits of the transferable permits that we have now, but to allow a certain portion that someone who new wants to come in and kind of make a run.
The problem is
That's just transferable permits, it does that.
Yeah, right. I know, and that's one of the things that we brought to this conversation.
A lot of people that can't afford to get a permit, and that's, at least they got an opportunity to go fishing if they could transfer a permit. That was the whole purpose of making a transfer.
Yeah, I think that if I was to get into it and say I get one of these transferable or non-transferable tier 2 permits that you guys are talking about, and say it comes about 5 years from now, and I fish it my entire life, and I get to Sam's age or some of these other guys' ages that I want to retire, now I can't sell my investment.
Well, I think the idea would be, that you might use it non-transferable until you raise enough money to buy your own. That is transferable.
Right, sort
And
of
then
a
that one would
pathway.
revert back to the state to go to somebody else. That would be a new one.
New young life in.
While the new entrant is trying to raise enough capital in the fishery, he's going to be in a high-profile urban environment fishing. And I can tell you what, the first 3 years I was fishing, I was creating nothing but havoc everywhere I went.
That's the trouble is there's ferry channels, the fireboat, the marina entrances. You get somebody that's green, and they're setting the net, in the Sausalito Channel, or that was the reason the point system was put in, so that somebody knew what they were supposed to do before they could just go out and just somebody here's a permit, go try this out.
So why it was put in. It was put in by people that fished a long time that thought that they should get first right to the permit. And a lot of them never fished herring, but they got preference and they got permit. That point system is the worst thing they ever done.
Yeah, and we're not proposing bringing the point system back in because I think
there just needs to be some kind of qualifications for this permit and some kind of experience.
You had to be a
okay,
1 year,
something.
You knew someone.
You guys come up with that and whatever.
I don't know.
The 10
Well,
votes.
give an opportunity.
David, I don't know if I'm speaking too soon on this, but when they're gonna decide what they're gonna do and who are you guys? You got a committee. Who do you answer to? I mean, who's?
Well, so is what the process is going to be is this proposal has been, this straw man's been developed, sort of, we're getting input from you. There's going to be another additional public input meeting. And then there'll be, the department will come up with a proposal to submit to the Department of Fish and Game Commission for final approval. So if you're asking who does anybody speak to, it's the commission. They're going to have the final say on this. Now, the public can weigh in opportunities like now, and also during any commission delegate process, agenda item, you can weigh in with public comment during that process as well. So there's going to be multiple times when the public can weigh in on the changes.
Also, there will be a 60-day comment period when the commission is considering it.
Yeah, the department's still ultimately in the driver's seat. The steering committee's been brought on to advise and bring in stakeholders early on so that we can basically hash all this out, develop a management plan that when we go to the commission at our first meeting in August of this or October of this year, generally everybody's going to be on board with it, rather than we get to the commission and suddenly people, for lack of a better term, come out of the woodwork. Everybody's up in arms. We didn't know about this. We didn't hear about this. We don't like this. We want everybody on board and supporting it as we go through the commission.
One question is, how much longer is this going to go on before they're going to say, hey, give us something?
We're anticipating that this will go to the commission for a notice hearing, which is basically the commission's first pass at seeing it. The general public first pass at seeing it. Then it will be adopted or discussed and adopted at the December meeting of 2018. So it's supposed to be, we're anticipating being implemented this year. And it's still getting.
Where does the peer review fit in all of it?
So peer review is tentatively scheduled for sometime between April and June of this year. So that means that we basically will have a draft of the management plan ready for peer review and also for sort of internal department comments. We are working with the department staff who really work on herring sort of as the FMPs develop, but then the higher ups will also have a chance to comment on it. And so, oh man, sorry, I just was writing myself something else and I lost it. But yeah, so to answer your question, peer review, we're looking at sort of second quarter of this year.
What do you guys come up with so far on the non-transferable permit? Because I think you said that I was thinking back to some situation in a different state where it was a non-transferable, and as he was able to hold on to it for years, he couldn't sell it when he retired. So is this something that is basically like a lease from the state every year or every couple of years, or?
So as she said, this is kind of a very young idea, and so it really hasn't been discussed much. And so we're getting first public input on it right here, really. So How this will follow out will be determined by the department going forward, but right now we're just getting feedback on it. So,
I don't like that.
and so that's good. So no, so
I've had to go buy my permits.
yeah. So your comment is there shouldn't be a any sort of new entrant clause that we have to
I have
compete.
a comment about the point system. When I look back at the points, okay, the point system, there was California guys had permits, we'd come down and lease the permits, we had those. So the only way we could get a permit was we'd have points. There was another thing about the point system was so that the buyers couldn't buy all the permits. Because they didn't participate. Because you are in a situation where when you just have a free market, people can come in and buy. I mean, it's not happening now, buyers don't want this. That was another thing about the point system. So it's control of fishery as an individual fisherman, and not control of force.
So you like some sort of idea of experience qualification?
I don't know. I'm just throwing it out. To me, if the guy's a fisherman and wants to buy a permit, go buy a permit from the fishery. But there was some things to prevent people, companies from buying.
Well, you can only own one tier 2 or for you can't. The company couldn't.
Yeah.
They'd have to just
Well, they put it in all their workers.
Yeah, well, they can do that now.
I know.
So,
That's what you-
Yeah.
Canada.
Yeah.
That's what they did in Canada. then
well,
they
no,
put
this
it
guy's that own 27. One guy can't own 27.
I know.
So other comments? Any more comments on this? So you guys ready to move on? Yeah, we got about an hour left, so we got a lot more to cover.
So, today we're really focusing on regulations that are primarily relevant to the gillnet sector, but we are looking at regulatory changes in the eggs on kelp sector as well. So just want to give you a little brief update on what's happening in case people are interested. So we have been working with the only person who still fishes eggs on kelp to discuss with him his desires for that fishery, what changes he would like to see, and we're working, working with enforcement, working with licensing revenue, and also some other agencies in the Bay to try and figure out, what changes we can, what makes sense, what can we accommodate, so what's a good path forward. So just to let you know that there is sort of a parallel eggs on kelp process happening for regulatory changes as well.
On those permits, how many permits are there available? I mean,
In regulations, we were allowed up to 10.
and then they go back and forth between gillnet and so that you can turn.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't remember exactly how it's.
Yeah, and then you get so many pounds per permit.
Yeah, there's an individual quotas.
And then how many stacking permits? How many?
That's a thing we do have to address because they're held in the same standard. You can only own 3 permits in that fishery.
Say for instance, because of the situation now, say none of them are gonna use that quota that's there, and use that fishing fleet. Could there be an information where if no one has if those go back into the gillnet fleet, if that fish is gonna be harvested, say like this year, if no one's registered by a certain time, if they're not gonna do that row on kelp, and you've allowed that 285 or whatever tons, couldn't that go back into a fishery that, like this group here, that will catch those?
That's a good question. It's not something that we have considered yet.
Yeah, good point.
Has anybody been doing this year?
Not
I don't think so.
No. The word that I've got is no.
Well, that fish can go into our quota.
Well, not the way the regulations are.
Yeah.
But the future. But yeah, I mean, that will definitely capture that. That's something that I think we need to.
Yeah, or if they can only, if the quota is 280 tons and there's only 10 tons that Yoakum has licenses for, that should be able to go back.
Yeah.
Capture.
Okay, this was awful. Could we reinstate the 20-ton allocation for fresh food permit? For herring for fresh food? That was the last one we had that permit.
We talking about the what was considered at the time preseason.
Yeah, it began on the 1st of November. It's been on the books forever.
was 1st of November. And then it had to stop. When in January, it had to stop. So there was 2 months for fresh food. And, hey, that's the only way you're gonna be able to get that sort of thing going in this bay. If somebody's got the balls to go out there and try.
Well, in December, if the fish come back, that might be viable.
I tell you what, man, you could get old waiting.
This year,
Every year for the last 10. But that fresh food thing, that's real, because we're living right in the San Francisco Bay Area, and fresh food is a big thing, and it's also a big promo for this fishery. I mean, people say, hey, wow, look at the bay, it's alive, it's healthy, there's herring in the bay.
Well, and that's why the department, I mean, we did support that, the change, and yeah, we amended the regulations, gosh, it's probably been 4 or 5 years ago now, to allow, we removed, basically all we did was we took roe out of the regulations, and then it's a herring fishery, and it could be sold for food or for lure.
You still have a herring festival in Sausalito?
Yes, and I'm
That was
going
big
again.
time.
I'm going again.
2,500 people last time I was there.
I was there last year and the year before that. They have a panel, and come on over, Sal. They have a panel discussion. You get up there on the panel and people will ask you questions. I mean, you got a lot of experience. You can share a lot of stuff with those folks.
What is that?
And they're all interested.
I believe it's the 28th of this month.
Yeah, 28th of this month.
This is big time last time I was there.
Yeah.
I'd say, there you go.
Yep. Okay. So, and then the last sector is recreational. So we're, currently there's no regulations. And so we are looking at, what types of regulations should we be adding in order to, ensure that we're still providing a satisfying recreational experience for those who want to fish herring recreationally, but also to discourage the commercialization of this fishery. And so what we are looking at is a bag limit. And so, we'll be having this, a meeting for the general public in 2 weeks, and we'll be talking more in detail about our proposal for that and inviting people to comment on that.
What is your?
I think so. We haven't totally nailed it down, but it sounds like it's we're looking at 2 5-gallon buckets.
Yeah, I think it was like
Yeah, around there. So that's each one's about 25 pounds.
Yeah.
So it's 50
Oh,
pounds.
50.
Mhm.
I mean, we're trying to accommodate people that, I know there's a lot of legitimate use for baiting, but Rich can probably.
Herring?
Yeah,
There is regulation for roe and kelp.
there is, yeah, 25.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Roe and kelp.
yeah, roe and kelp.
Consider that a lot of these thrownet guys, they don't go into buckets anymore, they go into pools.
Or trash cans.
Yeah, so, you might think about a 20-foot cooler, something like that.
We're trying to find a kind of a happy medium, something that's easily measurable. So from the enforcement standpoint, they can quickly say, yeah, you bagged 2 buckets. Your 2 50-gallon drums are far too much. Any kind of situation where, so we're getting feedback on that. We still work with the enforcement to get it.
Limit to gear type too,
Yes.
because there was a guy who had a little Lampard rig, he was dragging down there in front of him. Yeah, like
A good one to look at that might be like the smell fishing on the river. Because there's commercial fishery, but there's also a sport fishery where people get like a bucket of smell. And, they have to dip them.
With those little paper.
I don't know how they do it, but I know there is a smell fishery on like in the Cowles rivers and stuff like Columbia. And it's like a 5-gallon bucket, and that's all you get.
Yes, gear restrictions are on our regard, specifying, cast nets and line. Okay, so do we want to take a quick bathroom break?
We need a 5-minute break and then we'll get started.
We'll start with the next thing.
5-minute break, Sam, to the restroom.
I'm gonna let you stand up and stretch your legs.
So, I'm basically just describing, sort of what the so 3 slides on each thing, and then walk through our proposed, just how I'm just doing it in a way that I can like sort of explain, what happens at each stage.
If we can, this is probably quick to the top part.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I agree.
Sorry, how much longer? We have one more. It's supposed to go till 4 o'clock, so 45 minutes.
So we have
why we made him transfer. So
never forget why we did that.
Specific, so people can get into the district.
Because I went to Monterey. This is for fishing game. So I went to Monterey and was so upset. I said, Sam,
You're checking
well, so I think that's what you're 45 was just in that. There's a million of times when I forgot. I know. What's the fine for about 5,000?
it depends if you're in the same situation.
It really does. I got to change.
If you're in red, you're gonna pay for it.
But because of
If you're in blue,
San Francisco, I got to change. When you look at it now, this is really like, I'm saying this because I was pretty tight.
anytime I'm low on tickets, I see you can get them like that.
Really, we're just trying to.
You can, because it's all, that's not, yes, the boosters right there, that's all they ask. That's the, you gotta be like a quarter mile away. It's a quarter mile away. It's all the. It's all. Yeah.
Here's what you missed. 30 years in the bay. Where it happened and how many spawned. Okay? It says a lot. You get a profile. You get a profile of fish.
So this is just
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I have this and I have
What really stuck out to me is that in 77, the sport throughout California, there was 36 recorded. However, the following 3 years after that, there was a rebound in 30, 40, 60, 80, 90,000 tons. So, this industry, and I'm not trying to eliminate people because of the nature of herring, but with the rules out there, really is resilient. And, we have probably in 30 years, all of a sudden, the average quota by landing, that is the first thing, it's been about 7.5 ships now. And every year, all of a sudden, you go see, then you actually quota at 10%. You know, sit around the table and discuss, well, what should we do about 10%? So, we harvested at 10%.
Oh, no, I mean, and that's, you know, I think that one of the goals of our school that strives to
Yeah,
it has to be going on.
Yeah, it has to be on the beach where they can do it. That's good, because this fishery is actually suffering from being contracted too much. For instance, there's only 2 buyers, one home now, it used to be 5 or 6 grams now. It's gonna, you know, if it gets too small, you know, there's no more market. No one wants to come anymore. And it's sort of that tipping point as far as the players that have come now. And one, that's it on the ballpark. That's great. He hasn't made any money in the past 5 years. They're going to put a hot dog. I don't know how long this patience is. Waiting for us to come back. But I'll tell you what, 10 votes.
All right, you guys, let's go ahead and get started again because we've got about 40 minutes left and a lot to get through. So.
But it has 3. That's how
we're just building on what we did.
I mean,
yeah, we're not done. We're not done. All right, it's good to see you.
Thank you for coming and
All right, you guys, we're going to move on to the management.
Yeah, management strategy.
Management strategy.
I'm not trying to.
Yeah.
Take you notice, so.
Actually, I was thinking maybe you should stand over here because I'm not sure that this is picking you up when you have good comments. But
when you talk, well,
yeah.
It's actually here. He said that.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Well, actually, it is that one. I'll transition.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
All right. Why is it doing this? Sorry, hold on.
Do you guys have a set in here, like a suggested parcel rule we can try around?
Yeah, I think that if we'll try to leave some time for other suggestions.
So I'm going to try and move through this quickly so that we can have a little more
Yeah.
time to talk generally at the end and get some comments and things. But so I do want to give everyone an overview. You know, so obviously, you know, we talked a lot about the regulatory changes that govern how fishing happens, but a major piece of this fisheries management plan is deciding, you know, what is the process for setting quotas each year. And again, you know, we're not trying to make major changes to that in any way. We really want, you know, we think that, I mean, everyone thinks that, you know, 40 years of data has shown that this fishery has been sustainably managed. And so, you know, we really, I think the idea behind this is trying to get the department to just keep doing what it's doing moving forward. So, you know, one of the core pieces of developing an FMP is developing what's called a management procedure or a management strategy. And just what that is a predefined process for what data do you collect to understand what's happening in the fishery? How do you analyze that data each year? And then how does your results of that analysis go into making a quota decision? So that's the process that we're talking about. And, there's been a lot of background work on this. I'm not going to go through, there's been sort of a number of different scientific analyses that were like the underpinning for building the support for why the department should keep doing what it's doing for the most part. And I'll go into that a little bit more at the public meeting in 2 weeks if anyone is interested in attending that. But I'm just trying to keep this brief and let you know sort of where do we get to. So just for the data collection piece, for San Francisco Bay, there are no major changes. They have a very robust monitoring program in place, and we anticipate that staying the same moving forward. But one of the goals is, for this FMP is to create a collaborative research program for use in the unassessed areas should fishing occur there. And, one of the major reasons behind that was because a few years ago, there was, sort of pressure from NGOs to say, the fishery no data is being collected in these unassessed areas. We should have zero quota available. And so the rationale behind having, keeping a quota in place to provide some opportunity, should someone want to go fish, we want people to go fish in those areas, but we want a procedure in place that says, okay, you guys can go fish, but you guys need to help us collect some of this data. And, so that process is still under development. We will be holding a workshop with invited participants from industry to try and get some feedback on, what data can be collected, because, we don't want it to be burdensome for fishermen. We want it to be useful for the department, relatively easy to collect, informative, and so we're thinking, sort of what information can be self-reported, and then how can fishermen assist, the department with potentially tracking, spawns. That's the type of information that we are looking for this collaborative research. Additionally, through that process, we're exploring avenues for expanded collaboration in San Francisco Bay, because obviously the department always doesn't have enough money, doesn't have enough staff, and wants help. So, we'll be looking for opportunities that, might be able to be implemented in San Francisco Bay, on a voluntary basis as we move forward. But so just, this particular management procedure is specific to San Francisco Bay. That's how we're going to set quotas in San Francisco Bay, and so it's going to be based on the data that's currently collected now. And so, however, we're interested in potentially making a change to the way that data is analyzed. And so currently, the department goes out, they conduct their spawn deposition surveys, and they tally up the total number of eggs at the end of the season. They say total number of eggs plus catch is the spawning stock biomass for last season. They then set the quota based on last year's spawning stock biomass. The implicit assumption there is that we think that the coming year's population is going to be similar to last year's. And that's why, we're saying, okay, we think a 5% quota, 5% on whatever was last year's spawning stock biomass, we think that's sustainable for the coming year. So that's the way that the fishery is currently managed. However, in one of the scientific analyses that has occurred as part of this FMP, a new model has been developed, and this model uses 3 pieces of data that the department already collects in order to predict the next year's spawning stock biomass. So it uses that spawn deposition information that the department collects. It also uses the young of the year recruit data, so that's collected by the Bay Study, Delta Bay Study group from within the department. If you've ever been to a DHAC meeting, or I think that you guys in your reports include sort of what the young of the year recruitment index is for each year. It's using that data, and it also, this model uses the summer sea surface temperature, so it's July, August, September sea surface temperature in the year before the season. And what they have found is that by using these 3 pieces of data instead of just last year's spawning stock biomass, they are able to better predict what the coming year's returns will be, what the coming year's spawning biomass will be. And so what that does is it gives the department, a way to be a little bit more proactive in setting their quotas, because instead of setting quotas based on, what we saw last year, it's a predictive model, we're looking forward. And, you know, it also meets one of the goals of sort of the FMP and fisheries management within California generally, of including ecosystem indicators. You know, there's sort of a desire to have a more holistic approach to the way we manage fisheries. And so by using some of these environmental cues like sea surface temperature, you know, basically this model has been shown to perform better, and the it's currently under peer review now, but the department biologists have looked at the model, looked at the data, and said it looks promising as an avenue to moving forward. So we're still exploring whether or not that will actually be implemented. The way that we will write the FMP, it is likely that we will, you know, say both methods. The current method that we have been using the spawning, you know, deposition surveys plus catch, is a viable method for estimating spawning stock biomass moving forward. So that will always be a fallback for the department. But we, you know, assuming that this method passes peer review, and I think it will, you know, there is this new available method that has been shown to give more accurate predictions of the spawning stock biomass. And so that is a new tool the department can use in setting quotas. And so then when they set the quotas, so, you know, we are basically developing a harvest control rule. And a harvest control rule, it's basically just a formula for if the spawning biomass is this, the quota is this. It's predetermined. And so it's, again, it's transparent. It's, you know, the idea behind a harvest control rule is to just provide security. Everyone knows exactly how decisions are made in this fishery, what information goes into it, et cetera. And so it kind of puts bounds on, you know, what you as fishermen can expect in the coming year. I mean, as much as you can expect anything in a herring fishery where it's obviously highly variable from year to year. Yes, so, you know, one of the benefits of this harvest control rule is it meets the MLMA's requirement for adaptive management. And, you know, we really just use, again, you know, there's been a lot of analysis that has gone into what I'm going to show you, but our guiding principle has been trying to come up with, you know, something that we can, you know, check all the boxes and say, we've done all this analysis and, you know, given all future uncertainty scenarios, we think this will be sustainable, but it's really, you know, based very much on what the department has been doing so far. So I'm going to walk you through how this works. Okay, so on this graph, so on the bottom, on the x-axis is, you know, the biomass. So, you know, from 0, so no fish, all the way up to, you know, what's my maximum, 50,000. And on the y-axis is the different quotas that you could have. And so under this proposed harvest control rule, if the estimated biomass in the coming year is below 15,000, there will be no harvest. So the quota will be 0. And that cutoff, based on the analysis that we've done, is designed to protect the ability of the herring stock to rebound. Because we know that herring can come back from very small sizes. We've seen it happen a number of times. But based on some scientific analysis, one of the analyses showed that fishing, when the population was really small, delayed that rebound. And one of our goals for this fishery is to minimize the number of years that the stock is in a depressed state. So by, you know, by having this cutoff where we have this zone of you know, no fishing under a certain number, we, you know, basically promote the ability of the stock to rebound as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I do. I've fished quite a few seasons where the biomass was assessed at 10,000 or less. And when it was 10,000, I mean, that's a big, you know, oh gosh, there's no fish, there's no fish, there's no fish. So here's all these fishermen out there fishing. The thing that you overlook and you haven't mentioned is when there is a diminished biomass in the bay, we don't catch. We don't catch anything.
No, that's acknowledged, and I brought that up many times, that in those low biomass years, the fish just aren't catching it.
Yeah, we just don't catch it, okay? So I think you're being a little too overcautious there. Also, that coupled with the fact that, you know, since these fish sexually mature at 2 and are really resilient, it has always been the case that even though a fishery proceeds, there's been a dramatic rebound in years when spawning biomass has been under 10,000. So I think that 15,000, well, it might be, you know, my big concern is that the fishery just gets too small, that the buyers don't show up and there's no market.
So let's those are all good points, and she'll document is what I'm thinking about, just because of the time factor. That you could get through the whole harvest control rule framework, which is about 4 or 5 slides. Then we can comment on thoughts on it and go from there. But just for time's sake, let's see if we can get through these slides.
But I will say, everything you brought up we are aware of, we've discussed.
Right, okay, good.
Okay, so we have, above 15,000, between 15,000 and 20,000. The quota jumps to a stable 750 tons in that range. And so.
Is that per June or?
So this would be for the whole fishery.
We have now. Yeah.
Yep.
It's essentially.
All right, yeah.
Right. And so the reason for that, so this cutoff, 15,000 tons, it's partly to protect, you know, the ability of herring to rebound, as I just mentioned. Although I will say, yes, it is a very cautious buffer. We know that it's, you know, but what it also does is, you know, one of the goals of this management plan is to protect forage. So herring are, you know, a food source for a number of things, a number of predators in the California currents, and specifically the, you know, conservation voices on our steering committee really wanted to see a management plan that has some precautions built in to protect forage when populations are low. So part of why this is overly cautious is because there's a lot of uncertainty about the needs of predators, you know, and so that buffer is built in. But
I have a comment on that.
Okay, yeah. So, but we are also, you know, we're balancing some very, you know, we're balancing sort of the needs of predators, but we're also balancing the needs of fishermen. And we recognize, and the voices on our steering committee, industry voices, have been, you know, really very strongly emphasized the need to, you know, basically keep this fishery open in order to retain a market. And, you know, so that is why we came to this agreement of having 750 tons of quota, you know, between 15,000 and 20,000. It's not a lot, but hopefully it's enough to keep, you know, to keep buyers coming down during low periods, so that when, you know, when the stock does rebound, you guys still have a market. So that was sort of the reason behind this, you know, this section. That's it.
750, we're at this point right now at 750. We are barely holding on to buyers. We are lucky you have 10 fishermen here right now, right? Because of that. So anyway.
Yeah. Yes. So from here, we then, from 20,000, we then jump up to a harvest rate of 5%. So 5% of 20,000 jumps us up to a quota of 1,000 tons. And from there, for every, you know, for every spawning stock biomass increase over 20,000, the harvest rate goes up. And so it'll increase from 10% over, you know, from 20,000, basically over this stock size, from 20,000 to 30,000 tons. And so what that does is, as the stock gets larger, you guys get to take a larger piece of it. And then, so 10% of 30,000 tons is 3,000. And we kind of came to this as a cap in our conversations with, you know, with the steering committee. We were trying to understand what would be the capacity of the fleet if we did have a long-term capacity goal of 30 boats, how much can each boat take during a season? And so we thought, I mean, from our conversations with fishermen on the steering committee, it seemed that, 100 tons of boats would be a big year for a lot of people. And so that's where we came to, okay, this, quota cap of 3,000 tons. And so,
That doesn't work. No, that doesn't work.
okay, so just let me get through this and then we'll take some comments on it. Okay, so then we would, basically the quota would be, in this proposed scenario, the quota would be 3,000 tons above, 30,000. So additionally, as I said, there's this interest in incorporating ecosystem considerations. That was one of the major goals of this FMP. And so, we know that the Thanksgiving herring is dependent on environmental conditions, and it's also, herring is constantly interacting with their environment. And so we are, basically looking at a number of different indicators. These are based on sort of another scientific analysis that we've done. We have a number of different indicators that look at, okay, what food is available to herring? So that's krill. What are sort of the other alternative forage available? Everything from anchovies and sardines to squid and young rockfish, things like that. What are the statuses of those different populations to get some picture of what the alternative forage landscape looks like, and then are there some a predator, basically a local predator population that we can look at and say, okay, if something's really bad in this predator population, maybe we want to adjust herring quotas a little bit to account for the needs of this predator population. So we developed this decision matrix to specify what data Ryan and his team should be looking at each year after they set the quota based on, so based on this black line, this rule, they get a preliminary quota, and then they look at these other ecosystem considerations. And, really we tried to design a process that was very similar to the kinds of conversations that currently go on at the DHAC meetings. I've attended a couple of DHAC meetings, and I was just really struck by the back and forth between the biologists and fishermen and talking about what they were seeing out there, just looking at, oh, we're seeing lots of anchovies. Oh, the water's been really murky. It's been really dry. Historically, those conditions haven't been great. What's the condition index for herring? All of that information kind of has to date been sort of discussed and goes into the department's final recommendation for, okay, this is what we think the quota should be this year based on, this holistic approach. And so what we're doing in this management plan is trying to provide a little bit of scientific underpinning and a little bit of transparency of saying, department staff need to look at, this, when they're making their final decision of what the quota should be. And so the way we envision that flexibility around this, sort of black line operating is that, so first of all, when ecosystem conditions are good, that means that, the department may decide, okay, we can actually, even though the stock's, really only at 20,000 tons or is somewhere in this range of 20 to 30,000 tons, even though the harvest control rule says, oh, it should ramp up, literally between 5% and 10%, maybe 7.5% is fine, because ecological conditions are good, so we can harvest a little bit more, and so again, that can go all the way up to 10%, so there's that area of flexibility, under this. Additionally, if conditions are poor, or moderate rather, there can be, basically the department has the discretion to adjust quotas down to take that into account. And then there are two areas of, if there is extreme, some sort of extreme conditions happening, so this might occur, in the event of an oil spill or some sort of massive problem, the department can reduce harvest to zero, sort of in that 15 to 20,000 ton range, or can reduce harvest, but again, the guidance here is these are extreme events when the population is, basically, certainly if the population's up over 30,000 tons, you know, it would have to be something really major happening for the department to, you know, really scale that harvest. Otherwise, they would just pursue, you know, the 3,000 ton cap. Okay, so I'm just gonna, I think 2 more slides. I think we just this one, and then we can open this up for some comments and questions and things. So when you think about the process as a whole, so the department will monitor the spawns as they do. You know, they'll tally up spawn deposition estimates at the end of the season. The base study young of the year monitoring, which goes on sort of continuously, that's always happening. Because remember, using this new method of estimating spawning biomass, predicting spawning biomass in the next year, we take that data from them, which is, you know, the number of young of the year from 3 years ago. And then we get information on these additional ecological indicators, you know, which is this summer sea surface temperature, these predator conditions, alternative prey conditions. And then the department, you know, I believe we will still have DHAC meetings, you know, because that's sort of a valuable thing in this fishery. And then the department would set a quota by October 1st. So that's the process that we are proposing going forward.
So let's can you go back to
Go back up a little bit.
yeah, that one should answer a question. So let's go with comments here. Let's go here first.
Could you just back up one more to the text of that precedes this?
This one?
Nope.
Just
Back, just the text.
Keep going back.
Not the graph, not the graph.
going.
Okay, all right.
This guy.
Okay. Okay, incorporating ecosystem considerations. Okay, productivity of herring is dependent on environmental conditions. Well, I think that's addressed in your new proposal for a model. Okay, that's not really an ecosystem consideration. It's or I should say that's been addressed already. Regarding forage fish, well, let's just say I'm going to speak right now on behalf of the sea lions, pelicans, and birds. Okay, we've been doing really well for the has used to monitor and allow quotas in the herring fishery. We eat as many herring as we want every year when the fleet is harvesting approximately 7.5% of the biomass. That's what the sea lions say. Need a mechanism to incorporate environmental and ecosystem considerations. Well, you know, this has always been science-based. And it seems to me there's some sort of ideological policy that we're trying to fit this process into. For instance, you know, maybe the current administration in Washington says to the EPA, we don't want you to mention climate change. And so the EPA has to conform to that ideological driven directive. I think you're doing kind of that here. Developed a matrix to specify what kind of information biologists should consider when setting the final quota. Well, that's fine. I mean, that's progressive. We should be doing that. But I am concerned about the input that ideologues have injected into the system. I'm perfectly comfortable with science, really comfortable with it all the way. But when we start respecting opinions that are not backed up by science, I have to take issue. Okay, that's all.
I got something to say. There's many times you've been out in this bay and we'll have 5,000, 6,000 tons of fish disappear. He doesn't know where they're at. He's just a poor guy in a skiff with 2 people. If this was Alaska or Canada, there'd be 5 helicopters, 3 airplanes, and 2 big boats with biomass capability. That fish is ending up in Berkeley, San Jose, everywhere. And there's no way that we could take a biomass test or an egg composition test. We have fish
last year, even when the rain, we had spawns down there, fish spawned in 2 feet of water. I was in 2 feet of water, I couldn't even set my gear, and it's a rainy season, and there are thousands of tons there spawning, and he doesn't know where they're at. That fish goes up, goes out, it just goes up the middle, we never count it, and it's happened for years and years and years. These herring don't spawn in the same spot all the time. It used to be Treasure Island was all the fish. We haven't had to spawn Treasure Island in 15 years. Now it has to be, now it's Richmond. Richmond's going through its cycle because there's lots of eelgrass. Richmond will stop. Paradise. You go to Paradise, there's fish for 4 or 5 years in a row, you don't see them anymore. But you always see them in the middle, we call the bonsai zone. And those fish, where are they going? Where are they going? You find them in San Mateo. We fished there 2 or 3 years ago. You didn't see a fish on the meter. We're getting 20 tons of both. And they're laying eggs. But you can't get to them. So we're touching this much of the fish that's coming in this bay is not on that paper. It goes in, it goes out. It's just, that's just the way it is. You know, and we used to be 300 and something boats at first, then we got cut in half. And when we were 150 boats, it was hard to find fish. How's this guy gonna find? I feel sorry for him. He gets, there's no way. You get up on the airplane, look down, and pardon the expression, it's a pimple on somebody's butt. And you can't find them. And then you could be 100 yards away and there'd be 5,000 tons and you don't know it. And they're spawning all over the place. Because a school like that doesn't just disappear. It's spawning and going out. And it's happening right now. There's fish spawning. So those spawning biomasses don't mean crap.
So how are you gonna help them?
Yeah, there's no way.
Let me just add
You know what I'm
something to
talking
Sally.
about.
Yes, I do, and so does the Department of Fish and Game, if you look at the records. When they first, this fishery is called the Pacific Herring Research Project, started in '73. I mean, these guys were, you know, they didn't know what to do. Anyway, so spawn deposition, they started with the spawn deposition. This is, you know, how they do it in Alaska and British Columbia. However, early on, they realized that they needed to, it was too much to ask of spawn deposition folks to estimate the biomass just by this sort of method of short sampling and subtidal sampling. So they, for 30 years, there was a hydroacoustic survey in the bay, and they combined the two. Actually, they would have a little palaver at the end of the season, say, well, you know, it was stormy and the spawn people didn't get out there, so we saw this out in the deep. Now remember, when fish come in the bay, they have to stage for about 2 weeks with the tide, moving in the deep with the tide. You can see them really easy when they first come in the bay for a couple of weeks, hydroacoustic, and we can see them on the meter. However, when they go off and spawn somewhere, that's where the mystery comes in. So, yeah, so this was, you know, relying on the spawn deposition was recognized as a problem that had to be complemented with the hydroacoustic. However, I'm sorry to say that funding ran out and Canada retired, and that was the end of that. But it was the accurate way and the easiest way to identify a school of fish when it first comes from the bay. Okay,
so let me make a couple comments and we'll go into some more comments. Just real quickly, I will say that the steering committee pointed out your points very clearly and loudly and continuously. So I don't think there's any question that the accuracy of the measurement is always questionable. Right, exactly. So, but the situation that we're in is the department has been following a protocol for a long time. And that's what you guys have been living by. However accurate it is, right? May or may not be that accurate. But that's the protocol we've been following. So the attempt of the steering committee and this proposal was to sort of match what the department's been doing. So everything that you're describing that was the problem before is still the problem after. This is just sort of memorializing the process so that you know, okay, there's this much, we're gonna get this much quote. There's this much, we're gonna get this much quote. So, and then there's that variable that we tried to give the department some discretion to where if the DHAC comes in and says, wow, the ocean's alive with all kinds of activity, it's flourishing, it's doing wonderful, well, then the department has that flexibility to move up maybe closer to the 10% harvest rate. And then if the DHAC comes in and some of their research says, you know what, things are down, we're on a decline, the ocean's in a bad cycle, well, then they can fluctuate down a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what they do now, right? If you guys come in and you're setting a quota and the DHAC says it's a horrible conditions, they go down a little bit. If they say, hey, everything's wonderful, they go up a little bit. So that was the attempt here in this proposal, was to sort of match what you're doing now with all the same problems that you've always had. We still have. That hasn't changed.
Right now, there's more fish in the bay now than there has been the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Right now.
So what does
I've
that,
had 2 spawns already.
so what does that mean to you, Ryan? Well, I mean, in the deep, we see these fish. Like the word is here that really, we don't know where they go. When they take off, this bay is huge. There's 10 boats now, and we can't cover.
It is huge. And
so, where's the credibility come for the fish that we see all in the deep?
The survey is imperfect, we know that, but we have a long data set. We've looked at this other modeling that's been done with airlines to incorporate the run of the year, the sea surface temperatures. Will hopefully improve the accuracy or improve the ability to predict what's coming. Realizing that the fleet is reduced, we've tried to augment that by developing a herring blog. It's not just you guys that are watching now, and I know you may discount the birders and the other people in the recreational community, but there's a lot of eyes on the water. No, we're not going to catch every single fish. We're not going to be able to measure every single egg. But I think, relatively speaking, we do a reasonable job of detecting the spawns, particularly the ones that are large enough to count towards biomass that will give you a quota that's fishable. And yes, we're probably going to miss some of the small stuff, so that far and away, but we do our very best to run, end to end, side to side. We've got staff down in Belmont that kind of watch things in the southern end of the bay for us. We've got the in-water work that goes on around the bay. All that's permitted to our environmental review staff. They're watching for spawns and some of these in-water work projects. We're out there, of course, the trawl surveys out there, the enforcement guys are out there. So we do the best, and we try to develop relationships with you that you're giving us information that we can go and follow up on. It's not perfect. It's as good as we're going to get. Unfortunately, that's just a reality.
But even if the quota is a little larger, we make the quota a little larger, we don't catch the quota. I don't understand. What's the problem? We're trying to make a living and doing this, right? And so we're down to 750 tons. There's only 10 boats here because we're down to 750 tons. All the guys start multiplying the numbers. Yeah. It's pretty simple. Well, I'm not going. I'm gonna lose money. So why would I come? So why can't these quotas be a little larger, regardless if we catch them or not? I don't understand that.
So this cutoff that we developed, I'll just plain say it was a hard fight to get to that. Yeah, I mean, the conservation community has the ear of the commission, has the ear of the public. We got to a place where people could agree that this allowed for a minimum viable fishery. And no, it's not probably the perfect number from an industry standpoint, but it was a win that everybody could agree that it was a minimum number of fish. Conservation community felt that it appropriately safeguard enough herring for forage. We have to interplay the variability of ocean conditions and everything else that's going on. And so that, and we have to base that quote on our deposition survey. If we don't have eggs to count, we can't make that numbers. We're not going to make that.
Just a second, Dominic, let me go in the back and then we'll go next one. Oh, I'm sorry.
I get the bottom.
Yeah.
Why are we stopping at 3,200 tons?
No,
somebody answer me. It's 30,000 tons.
Can you go back to
the
next
science? Why are you stopping us? Why are you stopping me at 2,700 or 3,000 tons? If there's 40 or 50,000 tons in this bay, I want a 5,000 6,000 ton quota. I don't want it. That line, flat lines on the top. We're giving you guys everything on the bottom. We want the top. And if you look at this, we're actually in the hurt because you got the orange, you got the yellow and the red to the right, which is much bigger than the green to the left. Okay? And I don't see, and at 20,000, 15,000 tons down to zero, we're not even in the game. But then once I get to 30,000 tons, I'm done.
And
I don't get any more. I don't want, that not doesn't stop at 30,000 ton.
there's
When
no,
it goes up to 50, 60,000 ton, we go up exponentially.
there's no
science.
there's no science.
No,
behind that.
so just to clarify, and Sarah made this point a little bit, there was some thought amongst the steering committee that there was a max cap as far as economics was concerned, right? So, yeah, let me finish. So there was a max cap, and so that's why, but again, this is just a proposal, and we're happy to hear your
Okay, here's the
input
thing. The
on
problem
a
we have
different.
with fishery, why there's no economics in this fishery, is we don't have enough quota. We need, this fishery has 6,000 ton, if this was up to 50, 60,000 ton biomass, and we had a 6,000 ton quota, the buyers would be interesting, and we're back in the business.
Okay, so just to clarify, your recommendation would be no max cap.
No
Yeah,
max,
no
that's
max.
all I'm saying.
Okay, I just want to make sure we got
That
it down
solves all
clear.
my problems.
Okay.
No max cap.
Federal guidelines are 20%, you're down to 10%. When biomass is that big, there's no reason that predators aren't fed. There's absolutely nothing scientific in putting that cap.
Okay, so from what I'm hearing from the group, no max cap.
No max cap. And
On the
actually,
upper
the
end.
fisheries, the buyers have told us that with a small quota, it actually purchased because the Japanese aren't interested. They know.
Yeah, okay.
They know what the quota is.
Yeah.
I got a question for Ryan specifically, right? So we'll say, for instance, the spawn that we had over at, in Richmond. I prefer to take the rock wall to the south, and so when you go and do your spawning biomass, and you look at the rocks and title, I just need you to clarify this. What do you just look at the rocks and 10 feet out or something, or do you go where we fish, like 200 feet, 150 feet?
Off that rock wall.
Yeah, because when you come by, I'll give you some, if I pick up eelgrass, which I always do when I pull my anchor, I'll save that, I'll put it in a Ziploc bag and I'll give it to you so you see the 8 position on it. What does your requirement tell you to do? And do you take that far out, which is?
We have and we do. So we do pre-season dive surveys where we'll look at what subtile vegetation might be in that area.
So what is subtile? Describe it.
Well, there's vegetation and there's algae, and there's also, we all know there's shell and other material out there, hard material that they will spawn on. So we can pick it up either in the rake, we can pick it up during our dive surveys. We've also relied on you guys in certain instances. There was 2 in my time. One was at Richmond spawn, another one was when they spawned over at China Camp. When it was offshore, clearly no vegetation there. We know they're spawning on hard substrate. So we estimate based on some.
You still will estimate that into your spawning biomass. Okay, on the other hand, when Yellow Bluff was open, and we were able to fish for so many years, and you got the reef right there on the point, I was understood that they didn't really dive. They only went on the shoreline and 10 feet out. Well, that reef goes out and they're spawning way beyond that. So they never took that into consideration in the past, and that's why I directed my question to you this time. Are you just looking at the rocks and 10 feet out? Or are you actually looking at that bedded eelgrass?
No,
or that width and that full length?
No, we expand to the bathymetry based on the bathymetry, because we can look, with all the powerful art, spatial mapping software now, you can look at what the bathymetry is, and we can see, fish on the meter, and we know just based on the vertical slope that they clearly would have spawned beyond what we can see it even below the lowest tide.
60 feet.
So we basically apply those, we expand them to the area of bathymetry that makes sense. We're not going to expand it down into mud, but based on all the bathymetry mapping that we have, we'll include that as well. So
because it just seems like, to me, we're not taking that into consideration, and our quotas just keep going down, and you got some big old spawns spawning for day after day after day, I mean, for me, it was hard to justify, so I wanted to direct that question to you. I mean, when, in that particular area, are you just looking at the slice along the rocks inside and out? Or are you really taking consideration?
We try to be
the
as
bed?
holistic
It's
as
the same
we
thing
can
when you get up
support.
to the whaling station around the corner, that whole patch is filled with eelgrass. When they spawn up there, they're not necessarily spawning on tidal, right on the rocks, you know, they're that whole eelgrass bed they're spawning.
Yeah, so we have the bathymetry mapping, but we also have eelgrass mapping that's been done by, there's a company that's called Merkel Associates, but they've done side scan sonar of the entire bay. So we can look at where those eelgrass beds are in relation to our spawning. So we make sure that we sample those pre-season, we get density estimates, but we also will include those in our mapping when we're doing that. Because we know.
You do that down in the South Bay, too, right? Like right in the middle of San Rafael Bridge. You know, you're a mile from shore on each side and you pick up that grass and it's just like, it's a sponge. There's so much egg on it. I mean, how do you even, I mean, how do you even do that? I mean, we're catching, we feel like we're on the moon somewhere catching fish, but they're spawning all over there.
I mean, we include everything that we can support with sampling and you know, our data collection.
But it's hard to get sampling there.
I mean, we recognize we're going to miss some small beds, but when there's
Small, they're not small, they're big. They go for miles.
we do the best we can with the tools we have, and yes, we're going to miss some stuff. But
That means a lot right there. See? That's not like, you know, last year, even with that rain, I found fish. You were there. We were up at the harbor. And there was a lot of fish in there, but I was telling you, even on the outside, 2 feet of water, they were boiling. But you know, how do you do that? And that's on a condition, but with the worst conditions around. The 2 feet of water, I was sucking them up in the jet. There were so many, but I couldn't set the gear. But all that fish went like there was nothing, but they're spawning there. And they went from the Sausalito Bridge all the way to that harbor in shallow water.
Sounds point's well taken, and we understand that you're making the best possible
Oh, no,
effort
it's
that
good.
you can. He's not saying that.
Yeah.
With the equipment that you have. Now that, to me, defines the precautionary approach. It's always been recognized that our methodology of spawn deposition and assessing the biomass has been conservative.
absolutely.
Very
That
hasn't been lost
addresses
in
the
this
precautionary approach. I don't think other layers of precaution are necessary. Just record that.
I think the only thing that we're trying to include with some of with this precaution is just the variability that we're going to see. I mean, you guys all know about the warm water conditions we have off the coast, and that did a number on a number of our fisheries, and we've got on again drought, off again drought. Just you've got maximum water input years, you've got a couple years of drought. Those are going to impact
the water right now.
Yeah,
They're searching for fresh water as we speak. I'm hearing they're looking.
So
for a place to go.
So when we're talking about precaution, we're just trying the unknowns of what's to come with climate change, because we, unlike the administration of Washington, we do include climate change as a factor that needs to be implemented in our fishery measure.
And you are trying to address that with this new combination of young and year, ocean conditions, and your spawn deposition, and that's great. That's great.
Remember this, the droughts in the 80s were the biggest years of that.
Right.
So don't just go by drought. It's ocean conditions.
It's ocean.
It's ocean conditions probably more than anything. Just this yellow and this red is what scares everybody. I would say in our group.
That's ambiguous.
The yellow and the red is ambiguous. The green is even ambiguous. I know we get an upside on it. And are the conservation groups going to go for us having a larger quota than 10,000 tons? That's my question.
It's all percentage.
No, but I mean,
You're talking about the max cap.
The max cap. I mean, are they going to let us have?
I'm not sure that they were.
Yeah, that wasn't there.
That was a big stickler on the max cap.
I thought it was at 4,000 something in the beginning. It's been getting lower and lower.
So
There's no justification for, if you stick at 10%, there's no justification for a cap. That is still.
They lose a lot of credibility.
I'm more concerned about the minimum cap there. How do we get that minimum cap?
I don't care about the
Well,
okay, so wait, let me just address where the maximum cap came from. So I'm the one who did the analysis, which is basically creating this big simulation model and testing this harvest control rule and a bunch of other ones, so many other different formulations, and saying, okay, if everything's great, how do they work? If everything's terrible, how do they work? You know, like, and trying a bunch of different scenarios based on everything we know about this fishery and what we think we don't know about this fishery, and trying to say, what's the probability, you know, just at the end of the day, the department wants to say, we ran all these computer simulations and we can say that this, you know, 90% of the time is going to be fine. And, you know, there's always a small risk that things could, you know, could go sideways. But so that's what we were looking for. In doing those analyses, the model that I built, it was included information on the biology of the stock, but it also included some of the dynamics of the fishery, because we were trying to capture that aspect of, you know, okay, well, you know, will people even go fishing if the quotas, you know, if there's no fish, basically. And so we tried to build that into the model to you know, say, well, you know, really, unless there's kind of a certain amount of fish, people really aren't going to go catch them under most scenarios. But additionally, trying to understand, is there a maximum economic capacity for this fishery? And so in our conversations with our steering committee members, you know, we just kind of sat down and like back of the envelope, you know, say, okay, so like if every boat caught their max for a season, and, you know, given that currently, you know, the number of permits is it works out to be about 40 boats, you know, that's where we got for 4,000 as a cap tonnage, because we were trying to figure out, you know, really. Yes, so the 3,000 came about when we then started talking about a capacity goal that was, you know, again, based on stakeholder industry feedback, that, you know, maybe we want a long-term capacity goal that's 30 boats instead of 40 boats, then, you know, what our long-term quota would be 3,000.
If you go to 40 boats and you're 100 tons, that's 4,000 tons, so you're capped. Right.
Yeah.
We don't want to cap. I just don't want to see it.
Yeah.
So, but do you think, I mean, how much, like, realistically do you think 40 boats could catch?
Okay, so let me just tell you, I can catch 200 tons, I can find 4,000 ton quota of things right. And it's 60 tons starting on Wednesday at 5 o'clock, by noon on Friday at 60, almost 65 tons. Okay, I uploaded the boats 28 to 29 tons. If I started on Sunday, till Friday, what can we put in, so 150? Easy. I can put in 150 ton in a week, and that's what I have to do to make this thing work. I got to catch 150 to 200 tons.
Okay.
Because right now there's not enough price.
All
right, and that's and price it's going to be hard for me to even catch it. I can't. With the quota this year, I'm probably not going to catch it. Some guys aren't equipped to catch that. I get it, but you know, I mean, it's if the quota comes up, the thing is, the buyers, if the quota goes up to 5,000 to 6,000 tons, the buyers have the interest to come in, and the price goes up.
And if there's a 6,000 ton quota and it's not caught.
Right, that's fine.
Let's go over here. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so 100 tons is not realistic. And I say that because in 2014, I had 185 tons. That's the most I've ever had in the season. And the season before that, it was 150 tons. I mean, it's possible to get some, I mean, if fish is around with 10 or 15 or 20 boats, you know, everybody's 20.
Well, the 100 ton was an average. So you're going to have your guys with 200 and you're going to have your guys with 50. So
I think other guys did really good too.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody was lined up with fish at the pump. I wasn't the
I
only.
think they're looking at the landings and they know what the
Yeah.
Is that the average of all the permits, regardless of if they were not used or not, or is that just the close?
just average landings.
Yeah, it's around 100 tons, but you know, you need.
No, I hear your point.
There's no, even if you have the big quota, if you don't catch it, fine. If you do, there's no reason to take that opportunity away. Trying to.
Well, why don't I say this, only in the interest of time? We'll take this back to the steering committee and revisit this issue, because I think, as Sarah said, I don't think the conservation side of that steering committee had a strong preference for designing a cap. So that, and from the department's perspective, it's a percentage of what's available. So we're less interested in the cap. It's really the floor is what we're most concerned about. The issue of forage. So I would recommend we take it back to the steering committee and we'll
What
have.
if we get 40,000 tons this year? Can you keep, like, instead of setting a quota, can you raise it as the quota's going up?
They don't have.
In
the
season, they don't have
No, no,
in
no.
season. Yeah.
That's not.
The in-season adjustments won't work only because if we're going to implement particularly this new rule with the sea surface temperature, the YOY, that data doesn't become available until the summer. So there's a lag, unfortunately.
Well, we're at 40,000 tons this year.
Hey, Vince, just on the lower side also, I just want to add that we had in the steering committee, they were presented with some information done by an institute that thought that a good cutoff or a safe cutoff for the fishery was at about 25 to 30,000 tons. And so this was, going against their recommendation to bring it down to the 15 and the 750. So there's a bunch of information coming in that's getting balanced and looked at from.
But to that, if we don't make an adjustment here, we won't have a fishery.
Yeah.
This fishery's gone. So you won't see me. Right?
This might be the year.
This is the year. This is
Yeah.
the make it or break it year, guys. Make
Yeah.
it or break it for all of us.
And honestly, that's what we're trying to avoid. I mean, one of the MLMA, the fishery management plans, one of the goals is to provide for sustainable.
It's hard to get a buyer.
And sustainability is just not about what food is, but it's for people to have an opportunity. So we're trying to get there.
And awesome meeting.
Yeah.
By the way, it was 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I was the only guy fishing.
Yeah.
No, and the buyer said, well, we'll give you $100 a ton. I said, I'm not gonna go for 100 a ton. Come talk to me when you can offer me 300. Well, half the seasons was gone before you come across. It was that close to winking out completely.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah. No, and the thing is, at the low levels of biomass, trying to figure out a way that what's enough to keep the fishery trickling along until the big numbers come back.
Right.
And so that's why somewhere, there was talk of 400 ton being a number to keep it trickling along. Is 750 the number to keep it trickling along? That's also within a reasonable amount considering the estimated biomass.
So you guys know on that side of the table, we got the big buyers to come.
Yeah.
We got the big buyers coming this year.
Yeah.
Right, they'll tell you. How much sleep did you do this country?
4 days.
I was on vacation, man, work all vacation, you get a buyer to get here. That was not worth it.
That's where we're at.
We gotta have 1,500 tons or we can't come.
And Vince is right, the bottom end, look at it, the bottom end is so hard for us. I understand where you fight it, but we're people and all.
If we don't get a quota, no, just take.
This long quota, you get what you have here. You're gonna get 7, 8 guys fishing.
Yeah, you're gonna generate some interest by the local guys too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll get
They're the ones that can afford to fish. If the price is right, they will.
Well, and that's that's what drove the conversation to get that the harvest cutoff down and still allow minimum viable, what we consider a minimum viable for most for the local fleet, because the operational costs are theoretically less. There'll at least be some quota for them to still participate, and so that's what drove the conversation.
Yeah, I hope that they pick up the slack because probably the upcoming crab seasons for these guys aren't going to be like they have been in the past, and they'll be looking around to do something.
So here's a question for you guys, and this is something that we thought about during our discussions as well. Would you rather, based off of the information that we have, would you rather have the cutoff go out to 20,000 tons, and then if the fishery opens, it opens at 1,000, as opposed to having this sort of smaller fishery at 15,000 tons where you at least get 750 to try to keep the buyers going? That was a lot of the thinking there, especially when we had some recommendations of the 25,000 tons.
I like the 1250.
What's that?
I like the number 1250.
Then you're at 22,000.
Yeah, those are tough
Yeah.
choices that
that's
present real tough. These guys, but
No, I know, but those are some of the things that you're thinking about when you're trying to create a control rule that keeps the fishery going.
Well, 1,000 is much better.
1,000 tons.
1,000.
But then you're gonna raise your cutoff to no fish.
Well,
I think they've
it
argued
doesn't pay
that,
for us to come here.
well, that you're here.
No, I think all things
Yeah.
considered, you've gotta go for the 15,000 because of, you know, the strength of the assessment and this new model coming in might not quite work out the way you think. When you add all these three factors that you're gonna be factored in, you might, you know, have something different than you've seen in the last 15 years as far as assessments go. So you better play it safe and have that cutoff be the 15 and not the 20,000.
That's a very good point.
Right. Because we got a new model coming. I mean, it's tough. Those are hard choices. I mean, I would prefer no cutoff at all, but you know, you're working with a whole new group of people. There are stakeholders here that are putting in money. They got skin in the game. You know, the Audubon Society in Oceania, they're not small players. And they are driving the show here. They have brought this MFP to the fore. There's no doubt about it. Let's talk about that.
So to the credit of Bud and Nick, they've done a really good job. I would say from the party's perspective, I think they've done a really good job of bringing your interests to the table, being persevering under some, you know, pretty tough conditions.
I've been there myself,
So we appreciate that.
it's tough. I give them all credit.
The other thing these people don't understand though, it's $5,000, and that's not even getting my vote out of Napa. And some guy from Audubon Society who drives around in his car with his glasses looking out here and going, oh, look at the birds. They don't have nothing in it.
And that's been raised.
I got a wife, kid, or, you know, we're trying to do something different, so. And these guys praise them for what Bud and Nick have done. I mean, you know, fight this.
You gotta be tough. You've got the hardest job in the world to watch over this big, I don't know how many square miles these fish. And you're, like I said, you're just a little pimple in somebody's butt because that's you got a lot of area to cover.
That's what they got.
That's why you help them all out.
That's why you help. That's why we've got the bigger, faster boat.
I don't care how fast the boat you got.
Well, you cover more.
You need an airplane.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have covered everything I need to cover.
Well, is there any final comments? One thing I want to say is just I appreciate you guys kind of making the trek up here because this information's been invaluable to the process that will be, you know, considered by obviously the department and the steering committee, and I know what it is to make the effort when you're working and to come to a meeting like this, and so it really is valuable. I appreciate you guys.
There's not a person in this room that doesn't want to protect this fishery.
Yeah.
Not one.
Yeah.
This is our livelihood.
I'll tell you how much I like this herring resource. I retired, sold a boat a couple of years ago. I drive around and look for herring spawns in my car.
I tell when you're my eyes in the easy.
It's sick.
I know
It's because it's in your blood.
That's even twice when there's a net one.
Well,
All right.
yes, thank you everybody for coming. You guys know how to get a hold of us if you need anything, and we'll keep you up to date.
Or you go back home.
All right, man. Good seeing you. So what's it do? Fly in?
Thanks for you. I'm signed up.
Oh, you're fishing, right?
I'm one of the guys here.
So is there fish right now? You guys are seeing some fish.
You've been at Sausalito.
I've seen them.
There's so much fish left there.